All right, we are live. Thank you for joining us today. Today you can see that I am joined by two women, which we know are equal to one man in Islam. We're joined by the amazing Mary Harb and my wife, Crystal.
But I'm not
Crystal,
amazing. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Nice.
I should have said, and the most important person who's here today, my wife. Crystal doesn't necessarily watch all of my content. She's not into talking about Islam the way I am. So we're going to be getting some of her genuine reactions. I'm sure many of these things, she's heard some of them, but many of the things that we'll be bringing up, she's never heard before.
Basically, I'm the color commentator.
All right, let me open us with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time together. We thank you for the technology that allows us to connect with fellow Christians and non-Christians from all around the world. We ask that the Muslims watching today or later on a replay approach the material with an open mind, that they see that the words that their so-called God and prophet teach are not compatible with women's rights. And then they make a choice from there. Either they decide, yes, that's correct, women are inferior to men, or they decide, no, this God is clueless about the real world. He has no clue what he's talking about, and leave Islam. We ask that you be with us today, that you guide our discussion, and prevent us from theological error. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so I'll give each of you a chance to introduce yourself. Let's go ahead and start with Mary.
I'm Mary. I have a YouTube channel that I never upload anything on, and I often talk about Islam. I'm just giving a warning to everyone. This is Safraz, who's my favorite Christian apologist, accidental Christian apologist. So I have a really vicious cold right now, so I may be like flipping this up to blow my nose and things. So I apologize in advance. This is best as I can do today. I'm on Sudafed. I'm on Afrin. I just took allergy medicine just to make sure. I'm going to be probably yawning a good deal because it's wiping me out. It's not because I find anything boring. There are going to be demons peeing in my mouth as Muhammad taught, but that's just the way it's going to have to be today. But thank you for having me again. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Glad you're here. Crystal?
I am Thaddeus's wife. Poor dude has to deal with me. I don't really know how to introduce myself. I'm a crazy feminist, so I'm probably going to have some interesting input. Let's see what else. Pardon?
It looks like one of your stuffed animals is making the shot, except it looks like it's upside down.
Oh, it's my hockey unicorn. My favorite hockey team, Dallas Stars. Anyway, obviously I love stuffed animals. Let's see, what else can I say about myself? I don't have a YouTube channel because I'm boring.
I've been trying to get her to talk about her own experiences on this channel for some time. She's very hesitant to do so.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, the only thing interesting about me is I'm obsessed with K-pop. That's pretty much it.
You don't think your chronic pain is interesting?
No, it's sad.
Well, it can be both, you know. Interesting doesn't mean good.
Fine.
So anyway, today we're going to be looking at a number of passages in both the Quran and the Hadith. We'll start with passages that are often cited as being negative. Then we'll look at a couple passages that Muslims try to use to counter that argument, to say that, you know, women are valued by Allah and whatnot. And then we'll go to their favorite tactic, which is attacking the Bible, and we'll look at some of their favorite passages to cite in the Bible as well. In the end, we're going to see that the biblical narrative and the Islamic narrative are very different about what they teach regarding women. I'm going to try to keep myself mostly out of this today. I'll just be facilitating. We'll see if I actually live up to my plan there, though. I may have some things to say after all. So we'll start with, let me bring it up here on the screen, Surah 4:34, all-time classic here. On each of the slides, I have the Glorious Quran, a translation by Usama Dakdok, an ex-Muslim Christian. He does something unique among translators. He translates what the Quran actually says.
I think he's Coptic, actually.
I just said Christian, so.
Yeah, I don't think he's a Muslim, though.
Oh, you think he's not a former Muslim?
Yeah.
Okay, well, whatever. Okay, my mistake on that part. Maybe he's not an ex-Muslim. But in
he was
case,
born in Egypt and raised in Egypt. That's why he's Coptic. So he had to study this. He had to study the Quran in school. So.
Yes. So he does something unique among translators, and that's that he actually translates what the Quran says, including all the grammatical tense errors, stuff like that. Which is important because, as we'll see, I also have Sahih International, the most popular translation up, and we'll talk about a little bit on this first one. But we'll see when it comes to, most verses, Sahih International is fairly accurate. But when it comes to verses that people like to use against Islam, they add a bunch of stuff, and we'll talk about a little bit on this one, and then on the future slides, I won't really talk about what it says. We'll just it'll just be up there for reference for people to look at. But I'll read the glorious Quran here. Men are in charge of women by what Allah preferred some of them above the others, and by what they spend out of their money. So good women are obedient, guarding in secret that which Allah has guarded, and of whom you fear rebellion. So preach to them and separate them in the beds, and scourge them. So if they obey you, do not seek a way against them. Surely Allah was higher big. So we can see all these things in the Sahih International in brackets are things the translator has added to try to make the verse not as offensive as it is on first glance here. They added for maintenance after spend. They add first, advise them, second, forbid, stake them in the bed, and finally strike them. There is actually no order. They've added that ordering. A man is free to go to whatever he wants to go to first. He doesn't have to go in order, and so forth. So I'll just open it up for you guys' reaction to this verse. Do you think that this is a verse that teaches that women have equal status with men?
I think one of the most significant things that's usually overlooked is the beginning. Men are in charge of women by what Allah has, that Allah has preferred some of them above the others. So Allah has preferred some people over others. And this is a term in Arabic that means preferentiality, that Allah actually likes men more than women. Why does he like men more than women? It's because men spend out of their wealth on women. So Allah does not see the family as the base structure of society. Rather, it is the man who has the wealth, the man who has the money. And it is from his wealth and his money that he gives some to his wife. And therefore, that's supposed to be something that is admirable in men, that they do this, that women should be grateful because men are spending their hard-earned money on these women, is really the attitude. Whereas from the most ancient times, because in the Bible it says that for the sake of his wife will a man leave his father and mother, and the two will become one flesh. From the earliest Christian documentation that we have, we Christians always believed in community property. So when you formed a new household, that one household shared all its goods in common. And if you go to, for example, John Chrysostom, who was a bishop in the 3rd century, in the 4th century, I don't know why I said 3rd, in the 4th century, he actually told, I think he died in 397. Anyway, he told husbands that they are to tell their wives that everything that I have is yours, and that is the way a household is, and that wives should be should submit to their husbands, but he said because of the great love of the husband for the wife, because the husband shows such intense and incredible consideration for the wife that she will want to follow his leadership. And no matter what you do, your love and your devotion for your wife will never come close to what Christ did for the church. And then whenever it goes on, so I guess I'll stop here since we're just talking about that first sentence first. So go ahead, Crystal.
I mean, I don't really have much to say about it. I mean, obviously, I'm, like I said, very feminist. So anything that's going to say that men are in charge, I'm going to say is a load of crap. As Thaddeus chuckles. In our house, at least, you know, we share everything. Well, Thaddeus is the only one that works, so clearly we share everything. But, you know, there isn't a sense of, you know, being, you know, Thaddeus, you know, being in charge and, you know, taking control of things. It's, you know, that would drive me insane, I think. Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll get a chance to talk about the Christian understanding of marriage later on, but just for now, you know, so you're saying you don't agree that men were created by God to be put in charge of women, and that women should be grateful that they get to spend the man's money?
No. No. I mean, spending your money is fun. I'm not going to lie, but the fact that I should be grateful about it and that you were created to be in charge, hard pass.
Well, it's also true that you only have that it's not even that Islamic women get to spend the money of the man, because that's not even the idea. The idea is that he gives the women a small allowance of food, clothing, for their own food, for their own clothing, for oil. And
it's not like they have unlimited access to the man's funds.
And if they divorce, of course, the only thing that the woman has is her mar, which was, and that's it. You know, none of her husband's property is hers at all.
And you know, they're not allowed to be independent. You know, heaven forbid she work outside of the home. You know, it's not a thing.
So what do you think of the second half of this verse here, that if the woman isn't in her place and she's not being obedient, that the man has some recourse here? And actually, she doesn't actually even have to be disobedient. He just has to fear that she's going to be disobedient. And then he can do three things. He can talk to her, you know, encourage her to get back on the straight path or whatever. He can separate from her in bed, make her sleep in a separate room, or whatever the case may be, or he can beat her. Does that sound like a good thing to you?
No, and yeah. You also have the word that is translated here is preach to them, or in the other case, advise them, is a kind of scolding correction. It's not just a neutral preaching. It's a shame on you kind of thing. Yeah. And then, but as you said, that it doesn't have to happen if they actually are disobedient. It's only if you fear disobedience, or ill conduct, or uprisingness is actually kind of the word. So rebellion is a good translation. It's kind of uprisingness. But there is, and the reason that they say first, then finally, is because of only one hadith. And this hadith says that you should not sleep with a wife whom you've beaten that day. So
yeah, we'll actually get to look at that later.
From that, you know, if you beat her today, don't sleep with her. So from that, we have this whole thing saying that, you know, oh, so maybe you should do this in order then. If you can't sleep with them after you beat them, well, then that technically means you have to abandon them first. But it doesn't say that you can't go immediately to beating them and then just not sleep with them that night, right? Or that there has to be a this clearly laid out. No, it's just like, if you beat them, you shouldn't also sleep with them that night.
I think the thing that bothers me is that it's up to the husband's discretion as to what rebellion is.
It's even fear of rebellion. It's not even that they have rebelled. You are fearful that your wife...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like
maybe she thought, maybe you think she thought about
mm-hmm.
it, or she rolled her eyes at you, or, you know.
Yes. And that's actually the kind of example, the sighing and the rolling eyes or appearing to be resentful is given in by imams as reasons for doing these things to someone.
If those were reasons, Thaddeus would smack me like 12 times a day. I'm not even joking. I am the snarkiest person on the planet. And that's just, yeah. Mm.
Yeah. And so...
And it's just sorry, go ahead.
So one of the more interesting things is that the word used for rebellion or rising upness is only used one other place. And this one other place is in the same chapter, verse 128. And this is about what women should do if they fear from their husbands their ill conduct, right? So here we go. Now we have what men are going to do if they fear ill conduct. They should scold their wives, abandon them in the bed, and beat them. And by the way, this abandonment in the bed is a punishment because it robs the woman of the possible chance to conceive and thus have support in her old age. So that's why these marital rights were so incredibly important. It would be grounds for divorce anciently to deny a wife the rights to do that. So here it's fine to do as a punishment. So in 128, we find if a woman fears from her husband the same thing, this rebellion, there is no sin upon them if they make terms of settlement between them. And settlement is best. And present in souls is stinginess. If you do good and fear Allah, then indeed Allah is ever with what you do acquainted. Now this sounds really vague and you can't tell what on earth is happening here just from the Quran. But if you go over to the Hadith, you find out that the context of this was Sauda, who was Muhammad's second wife. After Khadijah died, he was the first one that he married. And he married her when she was probably about 35. And as she got older, close to 40, he thought that she was old, and she was called old and fat is what she was called, and multiple times. So she's old, fat, and unattractive. And now she's afraid that Muhammad wants to divorce her to marry other hotter wives. And so she made an offer to him that she would give up her night forever to Aisha, his child bride, if he would take them on. No, Safraz, we will talk about that in a moment, but it's not true. So she said, look, I will give up all of my marital rights to Aisha and most of my rights of support. Just, give me minimal support. Just don't divorce me. Because Muhammad had declared, at this time she was elderly, and Muhammad had declared that women among his wives who were divorced were never allowed to remarry after he divorced them or they died. It was forbidden. So she would be, destined to a hideous, impoverished future if she had been divorced. So this would have, in all ancient societies, be a complete violation of the marital rights of the woman. And it's just not allowed. But Muhammad, of course, wants to have more of Aisha. And so he says, sure, and has a Quranic verse that tells him that he can do this. Not only that, but he said that bit that says, and present in souls is stinginess or greed. That's about the women who don't want to give up all their basic rights in return for a husband not divorcing them. So if you do not give up the basic fundamental rights that were allowed to any woman in the pre-Islamic pagan, which was awful to women. They were awful to women, okay?
Oh, yeah.
But Islam made it worse because it basically called all the women who won't give up those few rights that they have that were absolutely fundamental. If you don't give it up, then you're a selfish person. And so you're a bad Muslima now. Now, let's talk about what we beat them with. Now, silly Muslims who like to lie, like Safras here, will say that it's only with a toothpick or a toothbrush, because a lot of times what's described as the instrument of beating is, in fact, a miswak. Now, what a miswak is it's a length of root that is dug out of the ground. It's a root of a particular bush that's very flexible, and it can be any length. It can be 2 feet long, in which case you use it to beat camel slaves and your wives, or you can cut a small piece off of it and use it as a toothbrush. However, the word miswak is just used for that of, any size of this root. When it was used for beating slaves and beating wives, that would be a longer bit that was used like a switch, the same as beating your camels. So they would beat their camels, beat their slaves, beat their wives. Now, one other important thing is that Justinian's code. Justinian was a very important 5th century Byzantine emperor. Thank you.
His wife is one of my favorite historical characters.
Yeah. So, you know about the Code of Justinian, right?
Yep.
So in his code, Novella 117, there is a list of reasons for which a wife can divorce her husband. And one of the things that you can divorce a husband for is if he hits you.
Yep.
If he cheats on you, if he commits adultery with another woman, or he sleeps around, either one, both are specified. Or if he hits you, those are valid grounds for divorce. So Islam talks about how wonderfully it protects the rights of women, but here they're instituting beating, which was previously considered criminal and grounds for divorce, 200 years before Muhammad was born. So basically he's pulling back time into a far more primitive era by instituting wife beating. The idea that Islam enlightened anyone is astounding and just wrong.
This whole passage to me is all about having the women live in fear to be obedient.
Correct. And in fact, Lloyd specifically brought up a hadith. Well, there's another hadith that's a man will not be asked as to why he beats his wife. Well, there's a longer version of that hadith, and the longer version actually describes the circumstances in which this was related. Someone was staying with Umar, and he heard Umar's wife screaming in the night because Umar had gotten up to batter his wife at night, gone to her room to slap her around, and he comes out and he says, stop hitting your wife. And he turns around and he says, you can't stop me, because a man will not be asked for the reason that he hits his wife. And he just continued to beat her. That's Islam. There you go.
No, that's just disgusting.
Amazing stuff there.
Yeah.
Shall we move?
Yeah.
Shall we move on to the second verse? Because we have many.
Oh, and I do want to address very, very quickly the daraba, the root of the to beat, means to hit, to strike, etc. It is used in a metaphorical sense in the exact same way that it's used in English. Like, I struck out toward London the next day at dawn, or so you can strike out toward a place, but if it's a person, you're always hitting the person. There is no time in which you strike that it is not hit. You strike a person that you're not hitting them. There is no toward here. There's no strike out on the road. There's none of that, which is a usage that exists. But if it says strike women, it means hit them. That's all it means. It cannot mean anything else. Any of this new stuff that people who do not speak Arabic are trying to bring up now and lying about the Quran is ridiculous. No one ever read it that way for the last 1,400 years. All right, Next one. Sorry.
I just saw. Sorry, Sorry, go ahead, honey.
I was just going to say, Lloyd posted the definition here from the root dad ra ba. Depending on the context, it means to beat, strike, smote, hit, the making a thing fall upon another thing, discipline, train, to cast forth, threw or flung it, seal, stamp, beaten with a mallet, sword, tent peg, mallet. But if a toothbrush is not in the text.
I saw a comment from, was it Valentin, that the Arab society before Islam surged was matriarchal. And I'm not going to deny that. In fact, the Nabateans were known for being matriarchal. But they're one of my favorite ancient societies. I mean, they built Petra after all, and that's on my bucket list. But it's before Islam surged. Once Muslim society took over, women were completely shoved on the back burner. It's a complete 180. So yes, there may have been matriarchal societies, and there were a lot, like you pointed out. But
well, it depends. It depends on where you were,
yes.
Because Umar said that the Quraysh had the upper hand over their women when they lived in Mecca. Then when they came to Medina, where they were influenced by the Jews, because Medina was under Jewish influence, he said that the Medinan women had the upper hand over their women, and that they were they began to talk back and do other horrible things. And so Umar basically got Muhammad to say that you should beat people, that you should beat your wife because of that. And yes, the word miswak is not in that verse. It is in some fatwas specify that a miswak is the proper implement for beating one's wife. And I was just addressing that. That is indeed not in the Arabic.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not like saying it's all Arabic societies, but it was. All right.
So we have Surah 2:223. Your women are a field to you, so enter your field as you please, and send beforehand good for yourselves, and fear Allah, and know that you will meet him and give the good news to the believers. So, honey, you are a field. I will be plowing you tonight.
I'm sorry, I have a headache.
If you say that, the angels will be cursing you till morning. So
Yeah.
if you refuse your husband and you die that night, you go to the hellfire. Just so you know, Crystal, they have a hadith that cover this. That if you refuse your husband's sex, you go to hell until you give him sex again.
This is like a big one for me. And I know there are even some Christian denominations that are like this as well. That you can't refuse your husband. And I'm sorry. I can't even put it into words how angry that makes me.
You mean you don't think that you're just a toy there for my pleasure?
Absolutely not.
So, ready for the context of this one? Because I know the hadith for this one too. I haven't prepared for this. I'm just really familiar with all of this stuff.
Go ahead.
The context was that a woman of Medina did not want to do sex in certain positions. She preferred missionary, okay? And she was against sex in other positions. And she was told basically, no, Allah says that your husband can do it however he wants, get over it. And this, of course, is completely up to the husband. If the wife wants anything, that's not in the picture. There's also an interesting note that it specifically says that Umar misunderstood this verse. And that the verse means that one's male organ should still go into the reproductive female organ and not into the woman's backside. But Umar misunderstood this verse and was... doing backdoor stuff until he got corrected. So that's just for your fun and edification.
I'm not surprised because, I mean, that's kind of what the verse sounds like, right? That you can do whatever you want to the woman. And then he had to be corrected because Islam does not allow anal sex. No, under no circumstances.
Unless, of course, you have worms that need to be treated that way, apparently. But generally not.
Okay, good to know. I guess.
That was also Umar, by the way. Yeah, that dude was really messed up.
I mean, pinworms were fairly common back then, but, whatever. Oh, man. Women as an object. Like I said, it's a big, touchy topic for me. And I know in a lot of Muslim cultures, women aren't even expected to enjoy sex. It is solely for reproduction. Obviously, the man will experience pleasure, but if the woman doesn't, well, whatever. Nobody cares. And yeah. I'm going to stop before I rant and get angry.
Yeah, and Lloyd, yeah, I had already brought up the one that says you can't beat your wife as you beat your slave girl and then sleep with her that same night, and that's why they add the thens to some of the translations. There's also, and the entire story about the telling someone to beat his wife goes into the suckling verses. Umar said that they were abrogated because apparently he really didn't like them. And one of the Sahaba, after Muhammad had died and Umar was the caliph, his wife didn't like that he was sleeping with their female slave, and so she suckled the female slave to make her a relative. But Umar said that not only is this abrogated, but now you should beat your wife and sleep with your slave girl anyway because she tried to trick you. So go and slap her around a bit, give her a good lesson.
I'm pretty sure one of the first things I ever told my husband was, if you hit me, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. He's shaking his head like, yup.
I don't know if it was one of the first things you ever said, but you've definitely been known to say something along those lines.
So, yeah.
All right.
Thank you, too.
Let's go ahead and pull up the next one here. So Surah 2:228. And the divorced women should keep themselves 3 menstruations. It is not law for them to hide what Allah has created in their wombs if they were believer in Allah and in the last day. And it will be more right for their husbands to bring them back when in the state if they desire reconciliation. But they have rights similar to the one over them in fairness, and to the men a higher degree than them. And Allah is dear, wise. So I picked this one because it kind of shows the purpose of women here, and that's that they are to have children. So if a man decides to divorce his wife, he has to wait 3 months or 3 menstruations to make sure that she's not pregnant, because if she's pregnant, well, he might want to take her back so he can get that child.
Ugh.
Yeah, the child shall never be counted as anyone else's child, and so that he has the right to always know who his child is. Yep.
Lord help it if the woman had irregular cycles. She's stuck with that man for a hot minute.
Well, he's probably about to bring up the verse that covers highly irregular cycles and other unusual things in a moment.
I actually didn't put that one in.
Oh, you didn't do that one? The iddah of those who don't menstruate?
Yeah.
So,
I had to be selective. I couldn't put it on everything.
So if you are pregnant, if you're not menstruating because you're pregnant, your iddah ends whenever your waiting period ends, whenever you give birth. But, yeah. So if you doubt, their period is 3 months. So no longer expect menstruation. That means that you're extremely irregular to the point that you just do not expect to menstruate at any, you're postmenopausal or like incredibly irregular and very rarely have periods. Then for those that have not yet menstruated is actually the better translation, because it's having not menstruated would be a very literal translation of that verb tense. So that means prepubescent girls who have been married, the marriage has been consummated, and now they are divorced, have to wait 3 months just in case they had their first ovulation and got pregnant.
Before they could get their period, yeah.
Before they could get their period, right? And for those that are pregnant, whenever they lay down their burden. Yep.
Yeah, this is a good support for the verse that we were just looking at, because it, again, shows the same thing, that what's important is that they might be pregnant. You got to make sure they're not, waiting in case you change your mind or something. It's like they might be pregnant, so.
the sole purpose of a woman is to extend your family line.
Pretty much. Yeah, I mean, we were saying earlier, we looked at that previous verse about, going to your field as you like. But you're right. It's really not mostly about sexual pleasure. It's mostly about having children. All right. So we got another Quran verse here. Whoops. Accidentally went 2 slides. So Surah 2:282. Oh, you have believed. When you contract a debt at a fixed time, and then it gives some instructions and then goes on. So if the debtor is mentally deficient or weak or cannot dictate, so let his friend dictate with fairness and call 2 witnesses from your men. So if there were not 2 men, so 1 man and 2 women, of those among whom you are pleased for witness, so that if one of them should make an error, the other can cause her to remember.
So basically they're saying women aren't trustworthy. You need 2 of them because one of them is going to screw up. So you need the other one to correct her.
And this one I pulled up as we started the stream because I want to give you the story as to why we have to have 2 witnesses among the women. Okay, this is from Al-Tabari, all right? So this was about the fall of Adam and Eve. So in Christianity, who is specifically blamed for sin entering the world? To whom is it assigned the blame that sin enters the world?
It's always Eve, but it's actually, not, but whatever.
Well, the Bible actually says who it is.
Yeah.
It says that through Adam, all fell, all sinned. Yeah. So the blame for sin entering the world, Eve was deceived first, but Adam is the one to whom fault is assigned and caused it in humankind and caused the fall. So here is Al-Tabari about the fall, okay? Adam whispered to Eve about the tree and succeeded in taking her to it. Then he made it seem good to Adam. When Adam felt a need for her and called her a sexual need, she said, "No, not unless you go there." When he went, she said again, "No, not unless you eat from the tree." They both ate from it, and their secret parts became apparent to them. Adam then went about in paradise in flight. His Lord called out to him. That's like running away, right? His Lord called out to them, "Adam, is it from me that you are fleeing?" Adam responded, "No, my Lord, but I feel shame before you." When God asked what had caused his trouble, he replied, "Eve, my Lord." Whereupon God said, "Now it is my obligation to make her bleed once every month, as she made this tree bleed," because in some of the there are other versions of the Hadith in which whenever you took the fruit out, the tree bled. "I must also make her stupid, although I created her intelligent. And I must make her suffer pregnancy and birth with difficulty, although I made it easy for her to be pregnant and give birth." Ibn Zayd continued, "Were it not for the affliction that affected Eve, the women of this world would not menstruate, and they would be intelligent, and when pregnant, give birth easily."
Because shedding our endometrial lining makes us dumb.
Well, no, that's a separate curse. That the stupidity is a different curse. Oh, sorry. Is that better, Romanos?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. I'm so hoarse right now that I'm like shouting because I can't hear myself. So it's bad. It's a bad habit, but it's like because I'm so sick, my ears are blocked.
No worries. Maybe I should have given you the slides in advance because I do have that exact story from Al-Tabari later on.
Oh, you do? It's one of my favorites.
Sorry, my cat is using me as a gymnasium at the moment. Einstein.
Do you have the ones about how women are going to hell because they're not smart? Okay. Awesome.
Yep, but that's actually where we're going next. So we might.
Crystal's losing her mind here.
I really, really am. Sorry.
So she's gonna teleport back in time and just
destroy everything.
Yeah.
So we're interpreting this as women being half as intelligent as men, or at least somewhat less intelligent, right? Because you need 2 women to equal 1 man. And a Muslim will say, no, that's not what it's about. Women just didn't have any experience in business. That's why they weren't allowed to testify in court. Well, let's just go ahead and go to Muhammad's words, because after all, Muhammad is the best interpreter of the Quran. The Prophet said, "Isn't the witness of a woman equal to half of that of a man?" The woman said, "Yes." He said, "This is because of the deficiency of a woman's mind." And continuing on with Sahih Muslim 79a, "O women folk, you should give charity and ask how much forgiveness, for I saw you in bulk among the dwellers of hell." A wise lady among them said, "Why is it, Messenger of Allah, that our folk are the bulk of hell?" Upon this the Prophet observed, "You curse too much and are ungrateful to your spouses. I have seen none lacking in common sense and failing in religion, but at the same time robbing the wisdom of the wise, besides you," meaning women. Upon this the woman remarked, "What is wrong with our common sense and with our religion?" He observed, "Your lack of common sense can be well judged from the fact that the evidence of 2 women is equal to 1 man. That is a proof of the lack of common sense. And you spend some nights and days in which you do not offer prayer in the month of Ramadan. You do not observe fast. That is the failing in religion." And
sorry, go ahead.
So what the Hadith doesn't say is the reason that the woman's not allowed to fast those specific days is because she's menstruating. So
Cursing too much and makes you a dweller of hell. I'm screwed. My dad was a sailor, so I come by it honestly. Literally was a sailor, not joking. I probably have the foulest mouth of anybody I've ever met. But yeah, the whole lack of common sense. Oh.
yeah, so here we have Muhammad strangely agreeing with Allah that women are deficient in intelligence, and because of this, because of being deficient in intelligence, and menstruating, the way Allah created them, they're going to be the majority of the inhabitants of hell. And other hadiths say the majority of women are going to hell for the same reasons.
Another one, Muslims will say that, that doesn't mean that women will be most women will go to hell. They'll only be the majority because there'll be more women than men at the end of time, because Muhammad had this insane prediction that there'll be 50 women for every man at the end of time. But there's also a hadith that says that there will be a minority, women will still be a minority of people in paradise. So you can't say that it's just because there are more women than men that more women end up in the hellfire, because it says that women will be a minority in paradise. All the extra wives that you have, they're going to be all the whores.
Sorry, I have cat hair in my mouth from Einstein. He rubbed all over my face. And I'm horrifically allergic. And so if my face swells during the stream, I'm sorry.
Lloyd just also posted another good one. Aisha said, "Oh, women folk, if you knew the rights that your husbands have over you, everyone would wipe the dust from her husband's feet with her face." And there's another one, Crystal, you're going to like it. Muhammad said, if I had told anyone to prostrate to anyone else, I would have told women to prostrate to their husbands because of the authority, the rights that the husbands have over the men. It's the same word. What do you think about that?
Honey, I am not wiping your feet with my face. I love you, but no.
That's all right. I can wash my own feet.
And I am not prostrating to you. You are not a king. I am not kowtowing to anyone. Yeah, hell no.
So what do you think about the justice of Allah here, though? He creates women as being inferior in intelligence, and then he sends them to hell because they're inferior in intelligence.
And the whole, you didn't fast all during Ramadan, but you're not supposed to fast when you're menstruating. And Ramadan is an entire month long. Well,
right. And the thing is, you're not required to fast, so you don't actually get sins for that, but you also can't get the benefits of that, and that's why you end up in the hellfire.
Yeah.
So all of these things are from this initial curse
Mhm.
that came about in the Al-Tabari that I spoiled and read ahead of time.
I guess
Yeah,
I guess my studying of biochemistry and microbiology, I guess I'm just too stupid to understand it.
must be, must be.
And I guess I should stop trying to learn the foreign language I'm learning because I'm just too stupid to understand it.
Yeah, but don't worry. We'll soon get past all these nasty verses, and then we'll get to the ones that Muslims point to that are merciful to women.
Merciful.
I took the verse when we get there, and this disclaimer in advance. I took these verses from Muslim apologetics websites. These are the best they could come up with, and when we get there, you'll be like, "Wow, that's not that great, really." But before we get there,
Okay, wait. Somebody just commented, "Know your limits." I'm sorry. We don't have limits. Men don't have limits, so why the hell do women? I just had to point that out. We don't have limits.
well, I mean, human beings have limits.
Human beings have limits, but we are the same as men. We can do anything a man can do other than pee standing up without making a mess.
We'll get to the biblical view of women eventually, but we still have a lot more.
That just made me mad, so I wanted to say. I know they were probably joking or saying it sarcastically, but like I said, they were being sarcastic. But
Yeah, he did send a
winky
laughy face afterwards, so I'm pretty sure he was being sarcastic.
He's just triggering the crystal.
Trigger warning. Like I said, I'm a super feminist, so.
I used to be competitive in powerlifting.
Oh, I love powerlifting. I was a powerlifter.
But I do have, it is absolutely true that while I'm incredibly strong for a woman and stronger than the average man, a strong man is always going to be stronger than me, without question. That's a biological limit for me.
I played football and ice hockey on the men's varsity teams when I was in high school, and I also powerlifted on the men's varsity team when I was in high school. Yeah.
So Sonny did confirm it was a joke, and
Yep.
important message here from Dragon. Like, share, and subscribe. God bless you. Do like the video if you're finding it useful, because that encourages YouTube to send it to more people. So getting back to our passages here, we're going to find out that women are very different by nature according to Muhammad. The prophet said concerning the urine of a nursing infant, water should be sprinkled over the urine of a boy and the urine of a girl should be washed. And then he goes through some more very helpful details about washing urine. And then they kind of ask him why this is the case. He said, Muhammad says, when Allah the Most High created Adam, he created Eve from his short rib. So the boy's urine is from water and clay, and the girl's urine is from flesh and blood. And then we go on. So the apostle said, he who believes in all and hereafter, if he witness any matter, he should talk in good terms about it or keep quiet. Act kindly towards women, for women is created from a rib, and the most crooked part of the rib is at its top. If you attempt to straighten it, you'll break it. And if you leave it, its crookedness will remain there. So act kindly towards women. And a different version of the same hadith, the woman is like a rib. If you try to straighten her, she will break. So if you want to get benefit from her, do so while she still has some crookedness. So we see that the nature of women, because they're created from a curved rib bone, is that they're crooked.
It's also significant that it says that the most crooked part of the rib is its top. So Allah created women deficiently, even before they were cursed. Allah's creation was flawed. It was imperfect. It was messed up. So women would be crooked in the mind, because that's what the most crooked part is, the top, that they would be crooked in their mind and will, which you would think would be a sin, right? Even if there had been no fall.
So again, Allah creates women deficient, and then He punishes them for it. And then, the Muhammad's amazing advice here to men is, yeah, women are always going to be crooked, so don't try to straighten them out. Just enjoy them while you can, because they'll probably go to hell anyway. So you better enjoy them now.
The whole urine thing, was it trying to say women are always dirty? I don't know.
Well, women are dirty. They break in certain readings of the Quran, that even touching a woman, not just intercourse, in some of the in one of the qira'at, will break your state of ritual purity. So, yeah.
Yeah, he says here that the boy's urine is of water, meaning it's pure and clean, and the urine of a girl is of flesh and blood, blood being dirty and unclean.
Pretty sure all urine is, well, I mean, technically urine is sterile, but pretty sure all urine is like urea and...
So you're saying that this scientific insight of Muhammad is not correct, that women's urine isn't made up of blood?
No. It's a lot of chemicals from your body plus urea. Urea is the most part of it. It's just the way it is. Filtered toxins from your kidneys.
I guess he was thinking of menstruation, and he in his infinite wisdom thinks that it comes from the same place as urine does. Your blood comes from your menstrual blood comes from the same place as urine. Is that scientifically accurate there, Crystal?
Yeah, no. They come from different places. I know there are still people today, adult males, that don't know that. I have run into a couple. They come from different places.
Yeah, we may have time for our Muslim friends to come up and discuss later. But right now, you need to stay on topic, kiddos.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 Muslims in the chat, and I think that maybe one sentence was trying to defend Islam the whole time. Everything else has been trying to attack the Bible. Don't worry, Muslims. We'll get to your criticisms of the Bible eventually. But even if you're correct about the Bible, that doesn't make Islam correct. So if you're telling us the Bible is wrong when you tell us that it treats women poorly, then Islam is wrong and you should leave it. You don't even have to join Christianity if you don't want to. But if you think that these things are too horrific to defend, then leave the religion that teaches them. It's pretty simple here. So continuing on, we also have some amazing words from the messenger here. Allah's messenger saw a woman. So he came to his wife Zainab. She was tanning a leather and had sexual intercourse with her. He then went to his companions and told them, "The woman advances and retires in the shape of a devil. So when one of you sees a woman, he should come to his wife, for that to repel what he feels in his heart." So basically, Muhammad just saw an ordinary woman. He got horny, ran home, jumped on top of his wife, who was tanning leather, which is a very stinky and disgusting thing, by the way. Had sex with her, and then went to his buddies and is like, "Did you know that women are devils? So if one tempts you to have sex, go have sex with your wife instead."
And note that also, who does the responsibility fall on in this hadith as to who's responsible for the man feeling lust? It's the women, because they are in the shape of a devil.
You'll notice that's still a common thread in society today, though. Who is to blame for...
But something very interesting, if you read The Shepherd of Hermas, and the point of Shepherd of Hermas is something completely different, but it was the most popular, pious Christian work in the early church. And the inciting incident for a whole bunch of prophecies and other things to happen was that a man who had previously been the slave of a woman, he's now a freed man, then he later sees the woman bathing in the stream, which she was probably doing under her clothes, like under her undermost garment. So she'd have like a shift on and she'd bathe under the shift, but the shift would get wet. So it'd be kind of see-through,
and it would
right?
probably be sheer. Yeah. Cause it was probably made of muslin. Yeah.
Right. And so he comes down and helps her out. And the only thing he thinks is, oh, if only God would give me a wife as good as this one. Like it wasn't, and that was the only thing that he thought at that time. And then later he begins to have his visions, and an angel comes in the form of the woman and accuses him and says that you've sinned against me. And he said, but I didn't have any lust. How could I sin against you? Was basically his response. But he still had some kind of sense of envy, meaning that he wanted to possess something that wasn't his. Send me a wife like this one. So he had a sense of possession, and that alone was considered a sin, and all of it was assigned to him. She was entirely blameless in this whole exchange, and then he had a whole bunch of visions and other things and prophecies about the future and stuff. But the inciting incident was this incident of her taking a bath, and exactly this much blame was given on the woman for anything that the man would feel, and all of it was given to the man as being a sin. Even if you don't lust, he didn't lust. Great. Well, you still wanted to possess her in some way, so that's not good.
Yep. Yep. It's, yeah.
So we'll continue on here. The prophet said, after me I have not left any trial more severe to men than women. And in our version, I have not left after me any chance of turmoil more injurious to men than the harm done to men because of women.
And what's that Arabic word there? Do you know what that is for trial? Do you know what it actually is?
No.
It's fitna. So fitna is like an extreme form of disturbance in the ummah, in the, like, fitna is a cause of wars, right? So this is like a major sin. It's not the way we'd think of a trial. It's like a huge sin. So women themselves are a fitna. Women are the main cause of fitna and strife, turmoil in the community.
How does that one make you feel there, Crystal?
How do you think that makes me feel?
I feel like you're holding yourself back here.
I am literally biting my tongue so I don't spout 4-letter words on your YouTube channel, okay? Yeah. I mean, it's verses like this that people would use as an excuse to, batter women or rape women or, and it's things like this that just really, piss me off. And I think, men are just as injurious to women as women can be to them. So it's, you want
to help her out, Mary?
I'm trying to not crazy angry.
Do you have the one? Okay, so fitna is like turmoil and disturbance within the ummah, within the Islamic community. So let's see if I can just pull up a really quick definition. Strife, sedition, civil strife and sedition are some of the definitions. It's an Arabic word with extensive connotations of trial, affliction, or distress. It's a word with important historical implications. If you are guilty of fitna, you would be under a death sentence. The first fitna was a major war, the first civil war in the Islamic community. Like every major civil war in the Islamic community is called a fitna. So that's the degree to which this is a severe word, okay? That's why it's important to understand that this says in the Arabic fitna, not just, we just think trial. That's bad enough, but the actual word is so much worse.
And who's
And I'll point out that,
what what that it would be,
I'll point out that Muhammad said that there wasn't anything more disastrous. So, going to war with non-Muslims, that's easier than the trouble that women cause for men, for example.
Close mouth. Say nothing.
So we'll go ahead and pull up the next one here. Evil omens. I heard the prophet saying, evil omen is in three things: the horse, the woman, and the house. Another version, Allah's messenger said, if there is any evil omen in anything, then it is in the woman, the horse, and the house. So there are basically three signs of evil, or three ways that evil can be brought in. And now, in fairness, what does it mean that every woman would be an evil omen? But there's only three ways an evil omen can be delivered: by a horse, by a woman, or by a house.
It's so ridiculous, I'm laughing. Oh, man. Seriously. Why?
Thunderous points out these were the best Muslims ever, because Muhammad tells us the first three generations of Muslims are better than any generation that will come after. So these early Muslims that the Muslim apologists will sometimes try to defend, today they're not even bothering to try to defend. They'll say that, this was just for their society, it's not for all time, blah, 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 that kind of nonsense. And then, Muhammad said the first three generations were better. So if this is what's better, then what you're doing now is worse. So according to Islam, your modern reformed opinions about these kinds of things are bad. Society says otherwise. But is society better at morals than Islam? That's what Muslims seem to tell us sometimes.
It's not worse, though. I mean, yay.
So you don't like the women being associated with evil omens?
Yeah, not so much.
Do you have the one about women breaking prayer in here too?
Yep, that one's next.
All right, nice.
So I will say that Muhammad did contradict himself, though, because he also said that a black man could be the sign of an evil omen.
Well, so is a man chasing after a dove for some reason. It's a devil and devil chasing the devil. So
okay then.
I don't know what he had against men walking behind doves, but he thought that meant that they were actually shaitans. Very weird dude.
So we have breaking of prayers. It was narrated that the prophet said, the prayer is severed by a woman, a dog, and a donkey. Aisha responded to this one, narrated Aisha, the things which annul the prayer are mentioned before me. They said, prayer is annulled by a dog, a donkey, and a woman, if they pass in front of the people praying. I said, meaning Aisha said, you have made us dogs. I saw the prophet praying. I used to lie in the bed between him and the Qibla. Whenever I was in need of something, I would slip away, for I disliked to face him. Well, I would dislike to face Muhammad as well. He's a pretty disgusting human being. But her point being that Muhammad, even though he said that prayer was severed by a woman, he apparently would pray while Aisha was in his way. And I think Aisha's right. He has made women equivalent to donkeys and dogs with this saying. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what else could you be trying to say here?
Do you have, are you going to have the surah, the ayah of women needing to draw their clothes about them so they're not harmed?
No, I actually did not put the hijab related things in.
Well, I will add that on there. So you were saying before about because I thought it might be coming up, so I wasn't going to talk about it. But they were talking earlier about how Muslims have to, or excuse me, that it says that women are a fitna. Well, part of being a fitna means that, and you have to be responsible for how men react to you. Well, the Quran specifically says that the reason that women need to cover up in Islam is because if they don't, they will be harmed. It says that you should cover up so that you will be recognized as a believer, as a believing woman, and that you will not be harmed. In context, the only person harming anyone would be Muslim men. So women need to cover up so that the Muslim men don't hurt them.
Because, heaven forbid we teach the men not to touch the women.
Because men are not capable of controlling themselves.
Yeah, because every sin, it even says in the Hadith that every sexual sin that you commit, every zina, was written down for you before time, but somehow you're also still responsible for it. Like it was decreed for you, every sexual sin that you'll commit. But it's somehow also your fault, and women are primarily responsible for it. Because again, like that verse basically gives men a free license to harass and assault any woman who isn't covered up.
Yes, it does. 100%. And it's absolutely disgusting.
And this isn't theoretical either. Men often do take it that way in modern Islamic society, that they think it's their responsibility to punish the woman for not wearing a proper covering. So we've been going a little over an hour here. This is probably not even half of the things that I could have easily pulled up that show that women are inferior in the eyes of Allah, of Muhammad. Before we move on to some possible defenses, is there anything you want to add? Yep. We did have a couple comments along this line early on. Thunder says the irony is that it was Khadijah that created Islam. The woman who employed Muhammad, he didn't write that, but who employed Muhammad gave birth to a religion that oppressed women for 1400 years. And Raymond Oz says, have you mentioned that in pre-Islamic Arabia, women were allowed to own a business and employ men? Khadijah is the best example. Muhammad was her best employee.
Yeah, one important point is that the separation that was required between men and women, and that the level of interaction that they were not allowed to have, women were not allowed to have interactions with men who were not one of their close relatives, that women could no longer really run a business anymore, because unless they were running it through slave girls, that could be the only possible way in which a woman could run a business. And then the slave girls would just be raped and attacked. So didn't seem very, very plausible there. But I mean, now that they're implementing strict Sharia, widows in Afghanistan are just starving to death, and their families are starving to death because it's considered, if you don't have a son who goes out and you don't have relatives to support you, because you're not allowed to do anything that causes you to work to be seen. You cannot be seen.
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to play the part of the Muslim apologist here. I'll explain why these verses supposedly act as defenses. So Surah 4:19, O you who have believed, it is not lawful for you to inherit women grudgingly, and do not hinder them in order to take from them part of what you had given them, unless they commit an obvious indecency and live with them in fairness. So if you have hated them, so perhaps you may hate something in which Allah has placed an abundance of good. So the argument's going to be here that that men are commanded to take care of widowed women even if they don't want to. They're responsible for inheriting their brother or father's wife when he dies. What is your thoughts on this?
Well, it was they will still inherit. So originally what would happen supposedly is that a man could inherit the wives of his father against their will if they were free women, is what some people say. And here they're not allowed to inherit them as more wives against the will of the women. But they're still going to inherit all the slave girls against their will. They're still going to buy and sell slave girls against their will. And you do not actually do not take from them part of what you've given them. That's just guaranteeing them their bride price, their mar. That's it. That existed in pre-Islamic Arabia. Oh goody. So you didn't lose your mar unless you were actually guilty of illegal, adultery or something like that. You'd lose your mar, but otherwise you had to have it. But women in pre-Islamic Arabia could often divorce the men on their own terms and would have to get their bride price back whenever that happened. Whereas a lot of times under Islamic law, women are not allowed to divorce men until they go to an imam who decrees that the reasons are good enough for divorce. But then, even when it is, a lot of times the imam will grant the divorce on the condition that the woman give up her rights to her mar, because she's the one who wants the divorce, not her husband. And so it's like, well, just give up your bride price. And remember that they have no other form of support. And they're not supposed to mix with men. So it's not like you can go out and get a job. No, you can't. Yeah. So it renders you completely helpless. You can't afford to leave if the imam is going to tell you need to give back your bride price to be able to be free. Because a lot of women don't have, their family doesn't want them to be another mouth to feed and doesn't want them back a lot of times. So it puts women in a really terrible position.
Yeah.
And it does say, don't hate your wives. Oh, goody. Deal with them in fairness. Well, what does fairness mean? Does it mean that you should love them all equally and treat them all exactly the same? No. There are other ayat that say that no matter how much you try, you won't be able to treat them exactly the same. And that's fine. You don't need to. It's all right. So the folks who go, oh, well, here it says treat them with fairness. Yeah, but in another place it says you won't be able to treat them with fairness, and that's still okay. So you got to look at all the places in the Quran where these things are mentioned and everything that's in together. So the folks who try to say, oh, he was trying to abolish polygamy because people really can't treat their wives fairly. No, you can't go to any one of the tafsir and find that explanation. That's ridiculous. In fact, Maududi, when talking about these passages, actually scolds those who are influenced by Westerners and Christians who dare to say that there's something wrong or bad in polygamy because you can't treat women the same. And he actually says, of course you can't, nor should any man be expected to love an old wife as he loved a young one, or a sick wife as he loves a healthy one, or an ugly wife as he loves a beautiful one. This is the best that Islam has to offer, folks.
Yeah, I actually messed up. I should have just read live with them in fairness, because that's what the Islamic website actually quoted. They're like, Allah treats you to live with your wives in fairness. And then the reference was 419. I messed up. I shouldn't have put the whole verse up here. I'm sorry.
That's the one that they talk about. But the thing is, what happens if your husband isn't being, quote, fair to you? Well, you should give up all your rights, according to 4:128. Nor should he be really expected to treat you truly fairly, only with an amount of decency, according to other Hadith. Or according to Tafsir explaining the the ayat.
Anything you want to add, Crystal?
I'm just, no.
This is supposed to be a defense here. And
Yeah.
this verse they go to the defense talks about inheriting women and not taking back the money you gave them for your contract in marriage.
Yeah.
This is the best, one of couple more, but this is one of the best things that can go to, is to say that you shouldn't cheat on the contract you made. You should honor your marriage contract.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the best you can do, then you should probably look back and think about what you're doing and how you're treating your women. If that's the best you can do. Yeah. I think the thing that my brain is trying to wrap around is you're inheriting these women, your older brother, whatever. I'm just, thinking that's just nasty. Sorry.
It's your stepmom. It's basically you're inheriting your stepmom to have sex with.
Exactly. That's disgusting.
And it's still allowed here. It's just don't do it against their will.
It's, and let's promote
Yeah, I mean, it is incest according to the Mosaic Law. This is another example of incest according to the Mosaic Law that Muhammad allows.
It's absolutely vile. And so my brain was still processing that and going, ugh. So that's where I was.
Hey, no worries. I went ahead and gave some additional context. So after that line, the Quran continues. And if you desire to exchange one wife for another wife and have given one of them a measure, do not take anything from it. Would you take it by Bhutan and a manifest sin? And how can you take it when one of them has gone into the other and they have taken from you a thick covenant? So we see that, if you want to get rid of one of your wives, that's fine. No problem there. It doesn't say if you desire to exchange one of your wives, what the hell is wrong with you? No, it says just don't take back the dowry. Don't take back the money you paid them to be married.
But no big deal if you want to switch, whatever. This is just nasty.
And the payment of mahr is like payment for sex is really what it is, because you don't owe it. Even if you don't consummate the marriage, you don't owe it. So even if the rest of the marriage has taken place, so it's kind of money for sexual access.
And so Swati is still in the chat talking about Christians and the Bible and whatnot. And I just said to him, do you have any defense of Islam, or are you too embarrassed to try to defend these disgusting teachings which come from your so-called God? We have our next defense here. This one from Saying of Muhammad. The most complete of the believers in faith is the one who has the best character among them. And the best of you are those who are best to your women.
Yeah, this is one of the ones that is supposed to be part of his farewell sermon, which is this incredibly, nowhere is it actually put in order, like everything that it says. You can't just find his farewell sermon written out anywhere. You just find all these bits and pieces places. So
if you read it all at once, you would smack your head against a wall.
Well, no, I think that this was just like all the wishful thinking projected back onto Muhammad got shoved into this farewell sermon. So I actually really doubt that he ever said this
kind of thing.
Right, because he said earlier that the women who complained about the men beating them were not the best of them. So this is like the counterpart, that those who are the abusers of women are not the best. But given that Umar was a notorious wife beater, to the point that Aisha, this is totally against Islamic law, but this was early before Islamic law was really instituted. Aisha had the position of the guardian of who was it? Whose child was it? One of, I think, one of Ali's daughters or something. No, it was someone else. She had it was some relative of hers. She had the charge of the guardianship of this little girl when Umar asked to marry her, and she refused because he's too violent with his wives. So if Muhammad had really thought that the best of the Muslims were those who were the best to their women, then why was Umar in his inner circle?
Well, I mean, what defines best to their women? I mean, if you're following the Quran, you can beat the crap out of your woman. So maybe he was the best because he beat the crap out of his wife, you know?
Yeah, and I also want to point out that this statement that they're going to supposedly show that women are valued and have equal rights in Islam is saying the best believers are the ones that respect their wives, meaning the best believers are men. This is the best they can do, is go to a verse that's about men. It's about the characteristics of men. And they say that this elevates the status of women's rights.
That is very funny and very true.
So Swati says, Islam raised the status of women, give them all kinds of rights. Can you give us some examples of those rights, Swati? Because I couldn't find anything. Maybe you're going to tell me that that Muhammad forbid bearing infant girls alive. Well, congratulations. We'll give him that one. What else did he do besides that?
Well, here's the thing. They always go to that. But Jews didn't kill their daughters either. And that's for Moses, for heaven's sake. Why would we need Muhammad to tell people not to kill their daughters whenever, Moses said as much, for heaven's sake? So it's very silly.
Yeah, and that's all they can come up with. It's something that's like blatantly obvious that any person with any sense of morals whatsoever would say, yeah, of course you shouldn't bury infant girls alive.
So, Sawati, let's talk again about what Umar said. He said that the Quraysh men used to have the upper hand over their women, but when he came to Medina, the women here had the upper hand over the men. And sometime after this, and then immediately during part of this entire hadith, Umar goes and slaps around his daughter in front of Muhammad to make him smile, and so does Abu Bakr. So anyway, go ahead to the next one, Thaddeus.
Yep, 1 second. Well, actually, it's still on this same slide. So another popular thing Muslims will do is say, Islam must respect women because there's a whole chapter in the Quran named after Miriam or Mary, the mother of Jesus. What do you think of this line of defense?
Wow.
There's also a chapter named after an ant, after a bee, after a table, after a cave, after a cow.
Wow, so Mary really had status.
Imran, yeah, the family of Imran is one of the chapters. So does that mean that Imran had an enormously high status in Islam? That makes no sense at all.
And cows and bees.
Yeah.
And cows.
Yeah, I think that this one's a total non-starter. And of course, there are books of the Bible named after women as well. But of course, they would never say that
They're
that
rather
means...
longer. They're rather
Yeah.
longer.
They were longer.
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
my question is always,
et cetera.
please name me the other women who are mentioned by name in the Quran, other than Mary. Guess how many there are, Crystal?
How many?
Just take a guess. All the women in the Bible, how many are mentioned by name in the Quran except for Mary?
One other one? Maybe? I have no idea.
0.
Zero.
You said.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not even one.
The Queen of Sheba is mentioned as the Queen of Sheba. That's the closest as you get. Everyone else is someone's wife or someone's mother.
Wow.
No name given.
Really respecting women there.
Clearly, Muhammad was totally a feminist. So our next teaching here is that women have rights. The Muslims will Hadith and not any of the rest of it, as for reasons we'll see. But they'll quote this part: "You have rights over your women, and your women have rights over you. Therefore, it's all good because women have rights and men have rights." Let's go ahead and read the whole thing, however. My father told me that he was present at the farewell pilgrimage with the messenger of Allah. He praised and glorified Allah and reminded and exhorted the people. Then he said, "I enjoin good treatment of women, for they are prisoners with you, and you have no rights to treat them otherwise, unless they commit clear indecency. If they do that, then forsake them in their beds and hit them, but without causing injury or leaving a mark. If they obey you, then do not seek means of annoyance against your women, and your women have rights over you." And let's see what those rights are. Your rights over women are that they should not to allow anyone whom you dislike to tread on your bedding furniture, nor allow anyone you dislike to enter your house. And women's rights is that you should treat them kindly with regard to their clothing and food. So women have the right to clothing and food. That
women
is their
have
right.
The right to basic necessities, in other words.
Yes.
Yes, and remember that the basic support of women was clothing and food and oil and housing and oil, because that was lighting, right? And
Yes,
fuel appropriate to their station in pagan Arabia. That already existed before. But remember that Surah Al-Nisa 128 modified that if you fear rebellion from your husband, and of course intercourse, but you should give up as much of that as you can and still be supported at least better than a slave. That was the minimum. Like, it should not go quite to the level of a slave, but you should be able to give up everything that would make you almost a slave, but not quite, or else you're a selfish person. Now, this is another one that is part of that same, it says farewell pilgrimage, but that is also assigned to that same farewell sermon, where apparently he said all the nice things that he forgot to say all the other years that he had never said before. So I don't even think he said this. But notice that it says that your women are prisoners with you. Because they really were. They were the prisoners of their husbands. And that causing injury or leaving a mark, that would be like crippling her, is actually what's meant. You're also not supposed to hit her in the face because that would humiliate her, but you could smack her in other places. That would be fine.
Yeah, we're actually about to get to that exact thing. But I just wanted to say again, keep in mind, these are passages that Islamic websites quoted small portions of to try to defend their prophet. These are the defense passages. We're not on the ones that I picked out to make Islam look as bad as possible. These are the ones that Muslim apologists went to try to defend Muhammad. And here we have, do not strike her in the face. And also, do not flog your wife as you flog a slave. It doesn't say do not flog your wife. It could end there, but no, it says as you flog a slave. Let's go ahead and read both of these in full. The Prophet said, "None of you should flog his wife as he flogs a slave, and then have sexual intercourse with her in the last part of the day." So it wasn't even, you can even flog him like you flog a slave. You just can't do that and then also have intercourse. Very merciful of Muhammad here. And the second one, Messenger of Allah, what is the right of the wife in one of us over him? He replied, "You should give her food when you eat, clothe her when you clothe yourself. Do not strike her on the face. Do not revile her or separate yourself from her, except in the house." And then Abu Dawood, who this hadith collected this hadith, he clarifies for us. He says the meaning of "do not revile her" is that you don't say "may Allah revile you." See, that's all that means is you can't say to your wife, may Allah revile you.
Yeah, and you're not supposed to strike on her face because that would humiliate her. You should strike her other places. And bruises there are fine on other places, but it'd be too embarrassing for her to have one on her face.
Would it be would it be more that it would be too embarrassing for her to have it on her face, or that she wouldn't be pretty to you anymore?
Well, you can hit her anywhere else. So
I'm just wondering, like,
well, there are a hadith that say that it would that particularly would humiliate her, and so that is the one dispensation perhaps that is given there, and some of the other ones say that that Muhammad was criticizing his followers for beating their wives like slaves and telling them that they're bad people for doing so. Like, I don't understand how you guys are beating your wives like a slave quite that harshly. So anything up to that point, Right, Philip. So it's like, I guess here you weren't supposed to hit this part of the face. Maybe if you punch her in the jaw. Actually, I believe that that pervy quote unquote revert who was on with David discussing Boomer, Kenny Boomer, was bragging about hitting his wife on the forehead and saying that's fine because that doesn't count as her face because I guess that's covered up enough by her veil.
Yeah, I think
break her ribs, but don't smack her cheek.
Yeah, I mean, Mary's right. The idea is here to not bring her public shame. It has nothing to do with not hurting her. It's don't bring her public shame. That's the same reason why it says don't separate except in the house, because to separate in public would bring her public shame. So you don't do that. You don't bring shame on the woman, but you can beat her all you want. That's not a problem. And again, she does have the right to food and clothing. So, very merciful here. And I can't imagine how we could have possibly known this without a prophet to tell us.
Yeah. You're not allowed to kick her out of the house until after her 3-month iddah. You have to support her until then. And then you can kick her out of the house. Because if she can't have sex with another man, how on earth can she possibly support herself? So you have to separate yourself from her until her iddah is over within the house.
Oh, man.
So changing gears here a little, Muslim website quoted this verse, or they didn't actually quote it, but they gave this verse as support for the fact that Muslims have to honor their mother because the mother is very important. We have commanded the human concerning his parents. His mother carried him with weakness on weakness and his weaning in 2 years. That be thankful to me and to your parents. To me is the final return. So that is Allah speaking there. So this verse supposedly elevates the status of mothers in Islam, according to an Islamic website.
Saying that a woman carried him with weakness, I'm sorry. I would love to see a man carry a baby for 9 months. You guys would cry every freaking day. There is nothing weak about squeezing a watermelon out of an orange.
Well, Sahih International added increasing her in weakness upon weakness. So, she's making, the idea maybe being that she's making a sacrifice. She's taking on carrying a baby, which makes her less strong. So you need to honor her because she sacrificed.
I'm pretty sure childbirth makes us stronger.
Muhammad really did have a thing for his mother and I guess idolized her because he actually did say a number of very positive things about obeying one's mother. And I think that very early on in Islam, especially while Khadijah was still alive, one of the reasons that he attracted a lot of slaves and women is because he said nice things about them back then. But then as soon as he got power, he said much more negative things about them. So there are a number of things about how important mothers are. But the thing is, mothers are also incredibly, incredibly important in ancient Chinese society. But that doesn't mean that women were treated well.
Today. Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing was, because the mother was so important, that would mean that the wife actually got denigrated as a result, and women were terrorized by their mother-in-laws. And
Yup.
so we have examples of parents breaking up marriages among the Sahaba. Umar broke up the marriage of his son, even though his son loved his wife. It's like, well, you have to obey your father. Being under the tyranny of both a husband and a mother-in-law, and just waiting for the day when you get to terrorize some other poor woman because now you have sons and you're the older woman, is just, it's horrific. It's really horrific. The mother-in-law was a monster most of the time in ancient China because of the Chinese culture. And this is well-known fact. And he had the same kind of attitude toward parents there too, that they would subjugate their children for the rest of their lives, especially the daughters-in-law who would suffer the most.
It's still a part of Chinese culture today.
My husband's Chinese. I have stories that will curl your toenails. My mother-in-law said that because I was a white woman, I must be so bad at raising children that, when I was pregnant with my third, she told my husband that basically advised him. She's like, oh, I guess it's too late for her to not have that baby, isn't it? Or is it not, not this kind of basically that she should abort because she's a terrible mother because she's a white woman and white women have no family values.
Yep, pretty much. I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So, don't tell me about honoring one's mother to this extent and the way that it's portrayed as being a positive thing. Yeah, ban someone. Oh, you already got it? Cool.
Looks like Lloyd did. I was about to do it.
You're so fast. Look at you,
Lloyd beat me. Yep, got some spam bots, unfortunately.
All right.
But I think a lot of Southeast Asian cultures are still like that. Korean to a slight extent as well. But yeah.
So I did post the link for any Muslim who wants to come up and defend Islam, not come up and distract or talk about something else. I don't imagine we'll get anyone, but the link's out there. If no one Muslim wants to come up and talk about the amazing teachings of Muhammad and Allah regarding women, then that in itself says a lot. In the meantime, we'll go on to what is perhaps the most popular defense, the defense that trumps every other defense. The Quran states in Surah 4, verse 1, "O you people, fear your Lord who created you from a single soul and created a wife from it. And from them he spread many men and women. And fear Allah of whom you ask of him and the wombs. Surely Allah was watching over you." Now, I know Mary knows why this is a defense, but let's see if Crystal can even figure out why it's supposed to be a defense.
I honestly, I'm reading it and I'm going, I don't know.
So here's how the argument goes. In Judaism and Christianity, Adam was created first and then Eve was created. So Eve is inferior. In Islam, they're created at the same time, so they have equal value.
Ooh.
But they aren't, because that isn't what it says.
I know.
Yeah. Who created you from a single soul and created a wife from it. Then the single soul and then from it. That is order. One, then from it another.
Yep.
But not simultaneous.
You may have created them at the same time, but you created the wife from the man.
It gets even better though. You know that womb's there?
Yeah.
Do you know the Hadith about the womb?
Okay.
So when Allah finished creating everything, the womb came up to him and grabbed his hips and said that she won't let go of Allah until Allah grants her a boon, basically, and begs Allah for a boon. And the boon is that the womb will be honored forever. This is a ambulatory, disembodied, primordial womb that's grabbing Allah. Now, are you ready for the reason for it?
The fallopian tubes are the arms.
Yes, they're just like the little things at the end of the fallopian tubes, like that, and his hips.
Okay.
So the reason for this, ready for this?
Yeah.
Is supposed to be that the Quran, or rather that the word Rahman, there's Rahman, Rahim, right? Allah, the Almighty, the most generous and merciful, or something like that, right? Well, Rahim is actually a word in Arabic, but Raham isn't. Rahman is like, everybody's like, what is this word? We don't know what this word is. In reality, it was one that was borrowed from South Arabic, but Muhammad didn't know what it meant. He just borrowed it. And all the words in Arabic are supposed to have these trilateral roots that are supposed to be meaningful. But somehow they aren't meaningful here, so what's he supposed to do about that, right? So he was like, well, it kind of has the same letters as in the actual Arabic word for womb. So this must mean that he's like, Allah has the name Rahman because it comes from the word for womb, and then came up with this insane story because he just didn't know the etymology of a word that he was using. Because he used a lot, the people who aren't very bright, but they want everyone to think that they're super smart, so they use big words, but they don't know what they mean. The Quran is full of all these words that Muhammad is using badly, or he just doesn't understand what they're from. And this is one of them. And so this is his insane story. And so now we have this disembodied womb in Islam that nobody really likes to talk about because it's really embarrassing.
You know what it makes me think of?
What's that?
Roman medicine. You know how they used to say that, a lot of women's health issues were due to a wandering womb that would, wander around their bodies.
Yeah,
that's what it makes me think of.
Well, this is the most wandering womb of any wandering womb.
Yeah, it wandered out of the body.
Like, whose was it? That's my question. Yeah. Whose womb was it? Was it Allah's own womb?
Oh no!
I mean, like, whose womb is this? Yeah, it's great.
I do think that the Muslims are onto something here, though, because it really does kind of all go back to creation. And we'll look at the fall in Islam here in a second. Mary already previewed it for us earlier, but we do have a question from the audience. First, if a woman's testimony is half in Islam, does that mean the testimony of a rapist carries more weight than the victim's?
Oh, sorry. I'll stay for this one.
That would be yes, indeed. It does. Not only that, but you must have 4 witnesses to a rape for them to be for it to be to bring a complaint about it, because rape is considered a form of sexual immorality, and all sexual immorality must have 4 witnesses. And that means 4 witnesses of seeing one's member go into the object, not just a vague thing. In one of the Hadith about it, it said, such as a pen dipping into the inkwell. It was the statement that Muhammad used. So that's the level of things that you have to see. You can't just see a woman fighting or struggling or and yelling and screaming, right? With the man on top of her and making motions. You have to see the inkwell and the pen.
Yeah, a while ago we went through
basically the ancient version of victim blaming.
Well, the whole reason for this is totally insane and kind of out of the scope here, was actually because Muhammad was like, there were 3 people who were blaming or were claiming that Aisha was committing sexual immorality, even though she probably wasn't, but they were still accusing her of it. Mm-hmm. And since there were 3 people who were doing that, Muhammad's solution is to say that you have to have 4 witnesses to that to get her out of any kind of trouble. But of course, that means now that same standard is carried over for rape, and not just for consensual activities, shall we say?
Yeah. All right, I'll be right back.
Excellent. So you require 4 witnesses to any rape, and a while ago, Lloyd and I went through a Dawa script, and one of the claims he made is that clearly Islamic societies are far superior because they have very, very few reported rapes. And I was like, gee, I wonder why they have very few reported rapes.
Yeah, a huge percentage of the women who are in jail in a lot of these countries are actually in jail because they have been convicted of sexual immorality, because they brought up complaints of being raped and being attacked, and they can't meet the Islamic level of proof. And so essentially the result is that they have now supposedly admitted to being sexually immoral because they can't prove the rape, but they did say that they had intercourse, so now they're in jail. And this is true in Pakistan, Afghanistan, huge numbers of Islamic countries have lots of women in jail who are victims, who have no recourse. And now they're in these awful, awful jails.
Yeah, it's pretty astonishing that somehow their testimony counts when they say that they had sex, but it doesn't count when they say it was against their will. Amazing stuff. So let me bring the slide back up here. So from history of al-Tabri. Now I know the Muslims in the chat, if they're bothering to pay attention at all, are going to tell us al-Tabri is not reliable. Well, okay, fine. None of your scholars are reliable. We got that.
Well, this is the one that I read earlier.
Right. Yes.
So it's the same one about how Eve was. There are plenty of ones that talk about not just the fall in Islam, but specifically creation, and it does say that, of course, Eve was created second, even as that implies. And it also, there are many different hadith about women being cursed with the fall and blame for the fall, and there is not a single hadith that blames Adam or gives Adam a curse. The only ones who are cursed are sometimes the serpent and always Eve. Eve always gets cursed. There is no specific curse ever given to Adam at all in Islam for what happened. And the blame is always placed on Eve for the fall. Whereas in the Bible, it says that through the sin of one man, through the sin of the first Adam, the fall came. So the first Adam's sin is what caused the fall. So Adam carries the responsibility for the fall.
Definitely. Philip said that this is the dilemma of Islam, although we already have several dilemmas, but I guess here's another one. You need a scholar to get the interpretation right, but no scholar is accepted. And that's true, because, we go to the Quran, they say, you can't tell us what the Quran says. You're not a scholar. You have to consult a scholar. We can consult al-Tabri, one of the top 3 scholars in the history of Islam. Al-Tabri's not reliable. You can't go to al-Tabri. Amazing stuff. Of course, they will go to him when they want to use what he says, but if they don't like what he says, you can't use him. But note what al-Tabri says about this hadith here. What we have stated about this subject was also stated by the early Muslim scholars. Now, by all reasonable standards, al-Tabri is an early Muslim scholar, but he's saying people even before him already said this, that this is the consensus of what all the scholars say. We get this charge that al-Tabri just repeats things and doesn't, discriminate, doesn't try to determine what's true. And he does give tons and tons of information. There's a reason that his history is 40 volumes. But he does tell you which things are more reliable. And right here, he's saying that all the Muslim scholars agreed with this.
So Carol has a question, if you can bring it up. I've been told by Muslims that Eve is never blamed for the fall, as they don't believe in original sin. Lies are complete ignorance. That's lies. They do believe that every soul is created with sin and with piety, which is breathed into it by Allah. So every sin that you have, and that's in the Quran, that Allah breathes into every soul its portion of piety and sin. So what is that if not a form of far more than original sin, right? So they absolutely do have a fall, because they have Musa asking or challenging Adam with being thrown out of paradise. But that hadith doesn't counteract the one, and then Musa says that, Adam says that his sin was written for him to do 40 years before he was even created. So that was already determined that he would do it. But in all of the actual narratives of the fall, which was an expulsion from the garden, and what did put people in a place where they would sin more, then all of them, every single one of them, blames Eve. And Adam is her dupe, as it is here. Like here, she tempts him with sex. I won't have sex with you until you eat this apple.
Yep. We read this earlier, so I'll just summarize it. That, Satan tries to tempt Eve to eat from the tree. It doesn't actually say fruit, although I've heard Muslims say we don't have the forbidden fruit in Islam. We only have the forbidden tree, which is false. Other hadith do use the fruit, but this one doesn't particularly mention the fruit. Anyway, he tempts Eve with the tree. She thinks like it's a good idea. She goes to Adam. Adam feels a need for her, and he desires her sexually, and she says, "Too bad, I'm not having sex with you until you eat from the tree." So then they both eat. They realize they're naked. Adam runs around the garden like a frantic idiot. Allah calls out to him, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I feel shame." And then God says, or Allah says, "What caused this trouble?" And he replied, "Eve, my Lord." Whereupon God said, "Now is my obligation to make her bleed once every month, as she made this tree bleed. I must also make her stupid, although I created her intelligent, and must make her suffer pregnancy and birth with difficulty, although I made it easy for her to be pregnant and give birth." And then a second narrator adds, "Were it not for the affliction that affected Eve, the women of this world would not menstruate, and they would be intelligent, and when pregnant, give birth easily." I didn't put it on the screen, but Al-Tabari continues with another narration that says that Eve had to get Adam drunk before he would do this, because when he was in sound mind, he realized she was tricking him.
And one of the hadith, it says that what the fruit did is it would make you poop. And the reason that they were thrown out is because there can't be any poop in paradise.
Oh, man.
You'll notice that Muslims are really obsessed with the idea of pooping and whether or not God poops. There's actually a bunch of hadith that explain this pooping obsession.
Yeah, I've noticed.
I've told Crystal about that. I'd be like, "I got a vigorous intellectual rebuttal today. A Muslim told me, 'Your God poops, LOL.'"
Yeah, because whenever Iblis was looking at Adam, the only difference between Adam and Allah visually was whenever he flew in through the nose and out through the butthole, he discovered that Adam had a butthole, and he said, "Do not be afraid of this one, for your Lord is Al-Samad," which means the solid. So one of Allah's 99 names is the solid, right? Because he doesn't have a butthole. That's what it means. Like, certain hadith try to hide this, but what it actually means is Allah is the buttholeless one, and so he is solid, because our intestines make us in some way hollow, because, there's a tube through which things go to our buttholes. And so clearly Jesus cannot be God, because like Adam, he has a butthole and Allah doesn't. That is the level of intellectual discourse that you find dealing with Islam.
I'm just gonna nod my head. I was like, when you were talking about original sin, honey, I was like chuckling. I don't know if you noticed, because I immediately thought of Eddie Izzard.
Oh.
One of my favorite comedians is a British comedian named Eddie Izzard, and he does this whole skit where he talks about original sin, and he's like, "I poked a badger with a wooden spoon." Because, it has to be original. It can't be something somebody else has done. Anyway.
I have not seen that one. I should look at it.
No, yeah, he's hilarious. You should totally watch.
All right, so now we're going to look at what the Bible teaches about creation of man and woman first, and then what it teaches about the fall. Because really the creation narrative is the key to understanding the entirety of the Bible and what it teaches about men and women. So Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. The image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So both men and women are image bearers of God, and this is the most important attribute that the creation narrative describes to people, that we are God's representatives on earth, that we are, when we look at a person, we in some aspect are supposed to see God. We don't, because we're sinful, fallen creatures, but that's what we're supposed to see when things are working as they're supposed to. Did you want to add something, Mary? Looked like you wanted to.
No, not for this one, for the next one.
Okay. So then we have the creation, more specific creation narrative in Genesis 2. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman, and brought her to the man. And the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become." So I'll let you share your thoughts first.
All right. So one of the most important things is that we always go back to the original Hebrew whenever we're trying to determine the meanings of things. Now, the word that's translated here as helper is ezer in the Hebrew. And ezer, every other time, is not like a word meaning an assistant or someone who helps you along in some sort of minor way, but is the without which you are helpless. So in every other instance in the Bible, the only one who gives a positive help, a help that exists, where the text is not saying, and so had no help, right? They're saying that this help exists. The only one who takes that role is God. So this is a role that women have for their husbands and that God has for humans. That kind of support, without which you are fully, that you are helpless, you're alone, you're without the completeness that you're supposed to have, right? And the wife was created out of the rib, not out of the foot to be trod upon by the man, and not out of the top of the skull to rule over him, but out of his rib to be beside him. If you look at all of the ancient patristic writers, these ancient men who lived in ancient times where people were very misogynistic, none of them say anything other than that whatever division, there may have been a division of labor that might have been based upon the predilections of Adam and Eve, but their equality and their intelligence and their status is explicitly affirmed by all the ancient patristic writers, and that is what this means. That this means that they are that she is his counterpart, because the word fit is actually from a word meaning corresponding to. So she is an ezer corresponding to him. So, and that the one flesh is not the absorption of the woman into the man or anything like that, but rather the creation of a new unit, the new family unit, which is based on one man and one woman, which is what Jesus himself said about marriage later, that this was the pattern for marriage that God set down, was that men and women, when a man marries a woman, they should unite and become one flesh, which absolutely requires monogamy. Other things were allowed, Jesus said, because of the hardness of your hearts. That's why things like divorce were allowed. That's why things like polygamy in the ancient Jewish state was allowed, because of the hardness of your heart.
Absolutely. Villainous pointed out that bone of bone is equivalence. And, Adam, he already had animals and whatnot, and He wanted something of equal value to himself. He didn't want to, just rule over a bunch of inferior creatures, which ultimately is what Islam makes women into. It makes them into be subhuman creatures that men are in control of, and that's not what the biblical narrative wants. I have a couple more things to say, but did you want to add anything, Crystal?
When it says the one flesh, it kind of makes me think of, I don't know if you've read Plato's Symposium of Love. Thaddeus is shaking his head no, but
I have.
Basically, we were two beings back to back and too powerful, so we were split in half by Zeus. And so we're always seeking our other half. And when you find your other half, you merge back together to form that one being. And that's basically Plato's view of finding your soulmate. And that's how I kind of view, the becoming of one flesh. It's not, like you said, the woman merging into the man, or like an anglerfish, the man merging into the woman. But, they complement each other perfectly.
Yes, and Faisal is saying something extremely false, that Islam they are not the ones who are saying that their law is perfect for the modern day. Yeah, you are. Your laws, if you're a Muslim and you're an honest Muslim who falls in line with anything that is in historic Islam, you can't be a Quranist and actually still be a Muslim. That's, at that point, you're just farting out new things out of your brain. There were no Quranists in the first 500 years of Islam, so that cannot be, unless what Allah did was a failure and there were no Muslims for hundreds and hundreds of years, and now suddenly there are. You can't take the view that that's what was meant to happen. So no, your fiqh, that's all that Islam was, whether or not it was Sunni or Sharia, it was always fiqh. So you can't say that it's okay for it to, oh, well, now I don't say that it comes from these particular things or whatever. No, you have to go with what Sharia says. Whichever school you wish to adopt, you have to go with that. And whether or not you think it's in tune for modern times, or that modern times should conform to that. The Mutazilites were late. They were not the earliest folks, and they were declared to be heretics very early on and disappeared from existence. So again, would Allah allow belief to be entirely extinguished? And the Mutazilites were not Quranists, so I don't know why you're saying that anyway. But if you are trying to say that, truth should be what Sharia is, yeah, I'm gonna say that this is appalling and that this is from Satan. But it's the Quran is as well. It's not like it's just the Hadith. It's not like it's just the Tafsir. It's all of it. No, Faisal, the Mutazilites were not Quranists. So I don't know why you're saying that. The Mutazilites were never Quranists. They, in fact, would alter the interpretations of the Quran to be in line with their philosophy, which is not what Quranism is. But anyway.
Yeah, getting back onto the subject here, we briefly saw that the Muslims try to say that Adam and Eve, falsely, according to even Islam, but try to say they're created at the same time. That makes them of similar value or are the same value. And I do see this charge all the time from, like secular society, that because Eve was created second, she's somehow inferior, and this is a horrible teaching of Christianity. Well, first of all, I think that the premise is idiotic to begin with, right? Why does being created after or before make something better or worse? There's no relation to the two. But here we see in the story, first with Adam kind of asking for, or God seeing that Adam is insufficient by himself, that he needs something additional. And then the summary verse at the end, that a man leaves his family and clings on to his wife. It's the man who is seen as deficient according to this narrative. I'm not saying there is actually a difference. I think men and women need each other. But if you want to push for a difference, it's the man who's deficient. He doesn't have everything he needs.
Yeah, and in some ways, this entire thing is a polemic against the folks who go, oh, dog is man's best friend, or my cat's better than any man, kind of thing. That's no, men and women are meant for each other. Animals cannot fill in that kind of hole that we have for human connection. And that no animal can be sufficient for that. However much, whatever you're trying to complete in yourself by going to lots of pets or whatever is just not ever going to happen. That this is what you are, the kind of relationship that you are truly made for.
I don't know. Sometimes my husband annoys me enough that I like my cat better.
Well, see, that's why a polemic would be necessary, right?
Sorry, honey, I love you, but sometimes Einstein's better.
My new dog is currently pooping everywhere in the house, so he's definitely the lowest on my list at the moment of everyone in my household. Although the field mouse that the children caught and put in a cage just escaped, so I'm going to murder it soon. So maybe that one's the lowest, because I'm going to put out a trap. Sorry, kids. You let it out. It's going to die now.
Aw, poor mousy.
It's a field mouse. I was going to trap it anyway.
I would keep it as a pet.
That's what I let them do, but I told them if it gets out, I'm getting a trap. So now it's trap time.
Get a humane trap, not a kill trap. Get a humane trap so you can let it out outside.
They come back in then.
Shh, don't kill it.
Crystal is very much an animal lover. Just so you know.
We had high season, so we got humane traps, and you put peanut butter in them, and they go in, and the little door shuts, and they can't escape.
Yeah. My field mice do not eat peanut butter anymore. I don't know why. I have to use. I've had to resort sometimes to glue traps, which are absolutely horrific, but I check them regularly so that I can dispatch the mice as humanely and rapidly as possible. But I've been reduced to that state with these overly picky eaters.
Oh no. Oh, anyway, back to the topic. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
I have a squirrel brain. It goes off on tangents a lot.
I'm sick, I'm just like occasionally just collapsing back here. I've got a big old blanket.
ADHD brain. Woo!
So Faisal says that he left me some comments on my previous video about that just happened to be about women's superiority. So I will try to find those. But in the meantime, we're going to finish the look at the Bible before we address Muslim objections. What the Bible says about women. So we already saw how the fall is portrayed in Islamic texts in Al-Tabari, which is compatible, although not necessarily word for word identical to what is said in various Sahih Hadith. Now we'll look at what the Bible says about the fall. But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit and ate it, and she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. So let's just stop right there. Did you notice anything crucial about the understanding of this passage?
That the husband was right there with her the entire time. And he was just like standing back waiting for her to eat, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's portrayed that Eve tricked Adam, but that's not accurate because he was there the whole time. He knew that the serpent was the one who had said to eat the fruit. So jumping ahead a bit after they ate the fruit, God said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree which I commanded you not to eat?" The man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree, and I ate." Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is it that you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." So we see that both Adam and Eve are passing the blame here. But if you're saying that it's Eve's fault, then you're agreeing with Adam. And as we'll see from the consequences of the fall, not agreeing with what God has to say.
I mean, yeah, if Adam's right next to her, he should be like, "Hey, babe, let's not do that. let's walk away. Maybe like stomp on that thing, throw it to the ground, and step on its head. You know, let's ignore that. I mean, so you can't blame Eve for eating the fruit if you're standing right next to her and not telling her, "Hey, maybe you should think about this."
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's the lamest excuse in the Bible. That belongs to Aaron when Moses comes back and he's like, "Where did these golden statues come from?" And he's like, "I don't know. We just threw the gold in the fire and they came out on their own."
Right? That's the lamest one, but this one's pretty close.
Anything you want to add, Mary?
Nope.
Alrighty. So then we have the consequences of the fall. To the woman God said, "I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth your children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband," or towards your husband. The Hebrew is ambiguous. "But he shall rule over you." And to Adam he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree which I commanded you, you shall not eat of. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you are taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return."
So everyone here gets curses. And by the way, it actually is not ambiguous there in the text. It is your desire shall be for your husband is what it says. And there are some folks who are really wanting to ram down certain interpretations that are currently wanting to make it contrary towards, but it can't mean that. Even if you go to the Talmud, and the rabbis hated women. They despised and loathed women. They said awful things about women constantly, but they did not read it that way. They said that it just means desire, and that they listed the four desires, one of which does not occur in so they listed out the desires that there were using that word form, and they did not read it that way at all. What they read was that this is linked directly to the childbearing, that you shall bring forth children in pain, and yet your desire will still be for your husband. So, and as a result of that desire, you'll have that desire in spite of the difficulty and pain of childbirth, and that he also shall rule over you.
Absolutely. And this is the consequences of the fall. We looked at the fall in Islam, and I don't recall any consequence for Adam. And I could be forgetting, but I don't recall any consequence. It was all on Eve.
Yeah.
There is not one hadith that has a curse for Adam.
But now Adam has to toil for the food, whereas before it was readily available. And now you have to toil and work the ground and deal with thorns and thistles that you didn't have to deal with before. Yeah. Working the land is not easy. I have a very large vegetable garden, and even that is not easy. So I can't imagine having land big enough to support your food, like everything you would eat. No grocery stores. So, enough wheat to make your bread, enough, etc. That's a lot of land. And, they didn't have tractors.
Yep.
And notice what else the biblical narrative doesn't say. It doesn't say that women are made stupid, now does it?
No?
No, nor that menstruation itself is a curse.
So Faisal, I'm having a hard time finding which comments you think are relevant to this stream. I found some of your comments, but they did not seem to be related. So maybe you could copy and paste what you wrote yesterday into the chat for us. I would appreciate that.
I think it's just more biblical polemics.
Well, I'm sure, but we're going to address some biblical passages, and they may not be the same ones he cited. So we'll give him that opportunity. Now, the other thing here is that this isn't the end of the story in Christianity. The fall is not the end of the biblical story. The first part of Genesis is the continued degradation of man, and starting with the fall, but continuing to man move apart from God. But he had a plan. He had a plan for restoration, had a plan to bring us back into line and undo the effects of the curse of the fall. So whatever this passage says about women and men, and I don't think it indicates any kind of superiority of one over the other, that it's a curse to women that they desire their husbands, because that's not the way they're supposed to be. They're not supposed to be needing after another person. But as I said, there is restoration. So even if theoretically speaking, somehow women were subjugated to men in the fall, that's not the final story.
Oh, so Faisal thinks that there isn't an age of. I've found something in the comments that there wasn't an age of marriage in the Bible. Well, actually, there are 2 places in the Old Testament and 1 in the New Testament that describe the minimum age of marriage for women, which is always post-puberty. And
You mean it's not 8 years old? What?
No, it's not. In addition, you also have he pathetically tried to bring up Montesquieu's book Spirit of Laws. Now, I have actually found that you did say that before, but you said that you seem to think that Montesquieu was talking about the legality of marriage in the West or something. I've actually read the Spirit of Laws because Muslims like to bring it up. And what happened was that Montesquieu is trying to talk about the universality of laws. And he just does not enter his head that anybody's such a pervert, okay? That anybody is such a pervert that they would marry a child. And so his idea... You have a very noisy cat. She's a very talky girl.
Love. That's how she gets attention.
Right. It says specifically that so he makes up an idea why it is that Muslims marry small children. And so his idea is that, well, women must have puberty early then. So he just states it as a fact, because it does not occur to him that anybody would be having intercourse with a literal child. That is so far beyond what is acceptable to him, to any Westerner, because he's trying to argue for the universality of morals. And if certain people think that boinking small children is okay, that would show that morality is not necessarily universal, and that in fact you actually do need revelation to some degree to correct the evil perversions that people will introduce into their law codes. And Montesquieu wanted to argue for this universality, so he just made the wild guess that people are going to be maturing faster in hotter weather, like plants ripen faster in hotter weather. It is just literally not true. It is literally not true that ancient girls got, in any area, including hot areas, got their periods earlier. In fact, they would have gotten their periods later than people do today, because a lot of it is dependent on how fat you are. And
nutrition plays a big role.
Well, Aisha explicitly says that they were very thin. that at this time, because they hadn't been wealthy for a long time, all the women were thin then. Well, obviously with the exception of Sauda, who managed to be big anyway. But the generality of the girls were very thin and slim, and not like girls became later on, when they had access to more food and were also confined to their houses both.
I mean, when you, like you said, people were, super thin back then because nutrition. Ow! Morgan, just because I'm not petting you, you cannot bite me. Leave. Sorry. Cats are evil. Oh, she bit my arm right in the flabby underbit that hurts.
Well, that's what you get for saying you like her more than your husband.
No, that's Morgan. The black and white one is the one I like more.
Oh, okay. Got it.
We have 4, so but nutrition plays a huge role. It has nothing to do with weather, and you get into other cultures back around the same time period where if you had an overweight woman, it was actually like a huge big deal. They were cherished because it meant that you could actually feed them. I wish I lived in ancient Asia. They would love me.
So Faisal accused you of misrepresenting what he said, and Faisal told me that his comment was on the alleged superiority of women in Christianity. So I had no idea this is even what he was alluding to, but apparently it is. So I'll go ahead and put his actual comment up on the screen. He said, look up French philosopher Montesquieu or whatever.
Montesquieu.
Montesquieu. The spirit of the laws. That's exactly what you said that he said. He states that harsh region in those times, women were marriageable at 8, 9, and 10. I'm pretty sure that's what you said that he said. While a woman who reached 20, she would have been considered old. You have no evidence to suggest the legality at the time prohibited such a thing.
By the way, so I do, and I told him that Roman law established 12 as the absolute minimum, no matter what else happened. And the reason that 12 continued to be the absolute minimum is because if you have a girl who ends up pregnant, then not having marriage is one possible one possible outcome of that situation is going to be horribly punishing for her and her child, because now you would have a poor woman who's unmarried. Even if you punish the man who got her pregnant, right? The usually teenager who got her pregnant. That's why it was still allowed sometimes to still have young marriages. But you also find the situation that authorities would intervene if a marriage was about to take place that they thought was inappropriate and not in the best interests of someone, for the reason specifically of youth or immaturity. While the upper class married, the nobles would have alliances very young, these marriages were not consummated at those ages. They were just solemnized. Anyway, the marriage itself, the ceremony was conducted, and they just wouldn't consummate it for years in the future. Now, again, yes, in ancient Israel, illegal sexual intercourse was severely punished for anyone. Now,
so let me just go ahead and read the verses he quoted here. And before you say anything specific about the verses, I want you to remind him or tell him, if he might not have been here, about what you said about the purpose of the Old Testament laws and what Jesus says about them. But before we do that, let me read the verses. Tell me, do you burn your daughter to death if you were a clergy and she had unlawful intercourse? Do you stone a woman to death at the doorstep of her father if she lied about her virginity? Do you put a man and a woman who committed adultery to death? Do you stone the man and the woman who promised to another man to death if a man forced himself on her and by extension force her to marry her?
Rapist is what he means.
Rapist if she wasn't promised him. I was thinking rape, but it didn't fit. It's the rapist.
So I'm going to tackle first the Deuteronomy 22, because this is a lie that I see very commonly. I don't know whether or not people are just as stupid or whether or not it's dishonesty, but Deuteronomy 22 has a number of situations in which there are accusations that something immoral has occurred, okay, that people are not supposed to be doing. But there's a series of events in which a woman accuses a man of rape in cases where it is ambiguous. There are other cases where it is not ambiguous. If you scroll up a little bit, we'll be able to see better. There are other cases in which it is not ambiguous that a woman has been raped. For example, she yells rape while she's being attacked and people run and find her. Or she immediately leaves the place where she was attacked and she goes and she tells people, hey, this guy attacked me. Tamar is an example of that. No one came and saved her from being raped by Absalom, right? And yet she was, or not Absalom, by, I forget the other brother. Anyway, she wasn't saved from being raped by her brother at that time, but she came out later and said, hey, I got raped. And then David completely failed as a father and did nothing about it. But that aside the point, she was not considered immoral or punished or whatever because she had not yelled loudly enough to bring people in at that moment, right? This is specifically about cases in which it's ambiguous. So in this one, it says that, let's go to, if a man is found, 22, if a man is found lying with the wife of another man, both of them shall die. So this word found means they're caught in the act, right? So, and they're caught in the act with all evidence of enjoyment all around. The woman cannot at that moment claim that she's been raped when every evidence of her behavior at the moment that she was caught shows that this was an entirely consensual interaction. Next is a betrothed virgin. She is not found. Instead, it's later discovered. Let's see where it says that. Hang on, lies with her. There's another place where it talks about discovery.
Yep. So this
where
one,
does it say discovered? It says it someplace. My eyes are not working right now. But anyway, in the second one.
Yeah, 23 here is the case where they're caught in the city.
Well, they're not even caught. They're not caught at all. At this point, see, the first one covers all cases where you're being walked in on and you are found in the act. Now, this is a betrothed virgin. What's different about her? Well, she should not be turning up pregnant, but somehow people know that she has had intercourse when she wasn't supposed to. She has turned up. The implication is that she's turned up pregnant because she's supposed to be a betrothed virgin, not showing up pregnant, right? And then she says, well, I got raped. Well, she hadn't told anybody until the point where she's being accused that she ever was assaulted. She's just saying this at that moment. Is she telling the truth or not? Well, if she had intercourse in the city, she could have at least expected that there was a high chance that someone would hear her if she called for help, or she could have rushed out immediately and gotten help, stuff like that. But if she was in the countryside, no one would have helped her. And also, she could have been so ashamed when she went back that she just didn't want to confess it by that point because she was a virgin and what happened to her was so horrible, right? And so only the man is held guilty in this case, and her accusation of rape is believed. And then in the final case here, the term that's translated here as seizes is different than the term that it's used seizes in 25. If you look in 25, the Hebrew is different. That seizes is a different seize. And so this is a terrible translation. They always do. They always just don't care about these translations, and it annoys me. But they're two different words. One of which is used, the the one in the countryside is used of violent activities, and it's used in when Dinah is raped and when Tamar is raped. This is the verb that's used. And excuse me, the other one is used for taking hold of something to grasp, oftentimes in terms of wielding something or to use something. So what's being implied here is that she is being persuaded with his hands, shall we say, rather than grasped violently. So these are different verbs and should not be translated the same way. Anytime it's translated the same way, it's a complete failure here.
So Faisal says, wow, the mental hoops are impressive, but the point of the passages are the punishments are dealt out. That's all. But you could still call our God vile. Well, hold on a second. Well, hold on a second, Faisal. So you're saying you lied earlier? Because earlier you told me to bring up this passage because it was supposedly about the superiority of women and how women are treated inferiority. That Christianity has the same problem where they treat women differently than men. All these passages we looked at, the man and the women are treated the same, except for the case where the woman is attacked in the country and there's no witness. Then her word is taken, meaning that she's taken above the man. So are you now telling us that you really quoted these passages because they have similar punishments for sexual crimes, which is not what we were talking about at all? So either you lied to get me to talk about these because you just wanted me to talk about them, or you're changing your story. Let me know which one it is.
There are also no mental gymnastics at all. These are all cases of accusation and what happens if accusations happen. And the actual meaning of the original language is important. You notice that before I talked about the original Arabic and how it was important many, many times. And, and called attention to specific words and their specific meanings and how incredibly important it was to know what these words are. I'm not treating this any differently. So then the final one is, so the virgin is not betrothed, she's been seduced, but the way this is phrased actually puts more blame on the husband or on the young man than the girl, because it says that he's the one who does it, right? He takes hold of her and persuasively in the manner that one would a harp and lies with her, and they are found. That means then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all of his days. So this is not a rape. There is another verse that specifies that in all cases of obvious clear-cut rape, that the man is always killed and the woman is not killed. This is a case in which, she pops up pregnant later, and so what happens if she would otherwise be guilty, right? Guilty in the same way that the betrothed virgin was, is that, he can be made to marry her. Now, this marriage can only happen with the consent of the father. The girl, by having had extramarital sex, basically is already giving her she gave her consent prematurely in this case. But there is another passage in which the father can absolutely deny that marriage and he still has to pay the same amount. Here there is an extra punishment for the man that seduces the woman because he's never allowed to divorce her no matter what she does. So she could burn his food every day for the rest of his life. She could waste his money. She could let his flocks go. She could not water anything. He has no grounds to divorce her ever. She can be an indecent woman who isn't actually an adulteress, but is otherwise indecent, and he can't divorce her because he's the one who went and tried to seduce a girl outside of wedlock to begin with. So...
Yeah, and you raise a good point that the father has to give permission here. This is often cast as if the woman is being forced into marriage. If she doesn't want to get married to this guy, then all she has to do is tell her father she doesn't want to.
Yeah, and he can say no, and they can just take the money and run. This also makes prostituting women, in ancient societies, a lot of times women were forced into prostitution. It's just a fact. But this makes paying a prostitute a very, very dangerous situation for a man, because he could be asked for 50 shekels of silver if he accepts even an offer that seems like prostitution, right? He can be trapped into paying an enormous amount. So it's an extra safeguard against women being exploited in that way. But these are all the severe punishments. First of all, something that very few people understand is that ancient Near Eastern codices were always written in the form of perfect justice without mercy. And the role of the judge was to be the mediator who could bring mercy to bear. You'll find that a lot of different crimes happen, and you don't find that these specific punishments, a lot of times, are the ones that are applied in those cases later on. Is it because they just didn't care about these? No, in fact, that's not all. Faisal, you're clueless. Just hang on, young man. I'll get to it in a moment. Okay, so again, the point of ancient Near Eastern law codes is that you have perfect justice with no mercy, and that the judge would be the mediator who would deliver mercy to the people. And this pretty beautifully encapsulates the final role of Jesus as our permanent mediator. Jesus was able to, and then when Jesus came, he perfectly fulfilled the old law, and as it was fulfilled, it was thus, through the fulfillment, abolished. So no Christians think that we ought to be following these laws of Moses, nor that they are for today, either mediated by mercy, which Faisal and no Muslim understands, because not only even Muhammad didn't understand. And in fact, by the time the late Iron Age rolled around in the 600s, no one remembered that this is how the ancient law codes worked. But that's not as what they were anciently and what they were intended for, nor even what they were later thought to be by people who just don't understand how they worked. So, when Jesus came and fulfilled the law and thus abolished it, he also established his own new law, which were commandments based on mercy and love. And so, yes, the Christian legal codes are more merciful because we have a permanent mediator. We don't have a temporary mediator. We understand what perfect justice is, and we understand the need for mercy and justice both.
Absolutely. And I just want to bring up that mental gymnastics or hoops and comment again, because what we're doing is we're trying to understand what the text is teaching. We're looking at it in its literary context, its social context, responsible way to read a text. The irresponsible way is to read some words and imagine whatever you want them to believe is the correct thing. So us carefully analyzing the text is mental gymnastics, mental hoops, according to you. But isn't that actually the opposite? Isn't this how you should read a text? Shouldn't you care about what the context is, not just take some words out of context and act like you know exactly what they mean?
A text without context is pretext.
So I'll bring up this comment since you said you wanted to address it. He said to me that I did not lie. The original point in the comment was pretty clear. It was to show that Christians who believe their passages are in perfect harmony with modern laws. That is certainly not the case. Well, Faisal, I accused you of lying because you told me to bring up this comment because it was supposedly about the superiority, in quotes, of women. How is this passage about that? If you brought it, if it's clear that it's about Christians not understanding that supposedly our laws, and Mary will correct you on that in a second, but supposedly that our laws aren't in congruence with what the Bible teaches, then why did you tell me that the passage was about the superiority of women? Because I said I didn't want to bring it up unless it was on that specific topic. But now that it's up here, we're going to go ahead and address it properly. So, Mary, what did you want to tell them about the about these supposedly being our laws.
Yeah, these are not our laws. We are not the ancient Jewish state. The old covenant has passed away. There's a new covenant. And again, we have to understand the difference between perfect justice without mercy and understanding that justice and still applying the mercy and having mercy and understanding mercy. So, of the Quran?
So he's accusing us of not addressing the rest of his points.
Oh, goodness.
We're gonna answer these, and then we're going to be done with you because you're not being truthful. I'm sorry, you're just not being truthful. You're trying to make it look like we're doing something that we didn't actually do. So we addressed Deuteronomy, and he says now you got to address the rest of my points, which is Leviticus 20:10, which says, "Do you put a man and woman who committed adultery to death?" According to him, that's his summary of the verse, and he's saying that the other ones only talk about men. So I guess he's referring to Leviticus 21:9. I'm going to bring that one up so we can see it in its proper context. So I guess maybe read from Leviticus 20, start at Leviticus 21. Sound good? All right. And the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the priests, the son of Aaron, and say to them, no one shall make himself unclean for the dead among his people, except for his closest relatives, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, or his virgin sister, who is near to him because she has no husband. For her he may make himself unclean. He shall not make himself unclean for a husband among his people, so profane himself. They shall not make bald patches on their heads, nor shave off the edges of their beards, nor make any cuts to their body. They shall be holy to their God, and not profane the name of their God. For they offer the Lord's offerings, the bread of their God. Therefore they shall be holy. They shall not marry a prostitute or a woman who has been defiled, neither shall they marry a woman divorced from her husband, for the priest is holy to God. You shall sanctify him, for he offers the bread of your God. You shall be holy to him. For I, the Lord, who sanctify you, am holy. And the daughter of any priest, if she profanes herself by whoring, profanes her father, she shall be burned with fire." So, Faisal, think to yourself, what is this passage about here? Is it about a law, a universal law for people of all time? Or is it a ceremonial law exclusively for the priests in the time of Moses? I think it should be pretty clear to everyone by reading the whole passage that all of these are ceremonial laws. Not shaving, not trimming your beard, that kind of thing. And what did we just learn about the ceremonial laws? Are they for all time, for all people? No, they're for a specific time and place. They set Israel apart. They set Israel up as an example for the world. And what is the overarching theme of the Bible? Is it that Israel was actually this perfect witness, that it accomplished God's purpose, and that man can achieve salvation by following God's rules, following every special rule that he creates to make it as hard as possible for men to go astray? No. The overarching story of the Old Testament is that people constantly turned from God, constantly disobeyed him, despite him making all these explicit commands, ceremonially perfect, and creating all these laws, these very harsh laws, as Muslims tell us when we quote them harsh laws of Islamic states, like those laws are necessary because they prevent sin. Well, that's what God was doing in the Old Testament. He was showing you that harsh laws don't actually prevent sin, that you actually need a real solution to the problem. Laws don't accomplish it. Anything you want to add?
There are a lot of restrictions there that are only for the men as well. These are not about clergy. These are about priests. There's a difference between priests and the Kohanim or Kohanim and the and the idea of a clergyman. They were set apart through all sorts of specific laws that were just for them. And they were restricted in many things that they were not allowed to do that other people were permitted to do.
Yeah, good point. Most of these laws only apply to specific men, and yet we're told that somehow these make women inferior. I don't understand, but I think that's because he didn't really write for that topic, and he just wanted me to address his comments that he made on a previous video, and he wasn't really caring about today's topic at all.
Why not?
All right, so let's get back to what we were actually teaching on here. Oh, well, first of all, we have a comment from a boss that says, "Don't hide behind the Quran, be proud of the Bible and explain." Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing here. We're explaining to you the biblical narrative. I don't know if a boss is a Muslim or not, but either way, we're here explaining the Bible. We are not ashamed of these passages. You saw that I just pulled up the passages that our Muslim friend thought were embarrassing and that I wouldn't be able to address without even looking at them in advance and preparing. I pulled them up and talked about them. So clearly I'm not embarrassed by them. I didn't have to go to some commentaries and prepare in advance. Now, if I did, I could have probably said even more intelligent things on them, even more clear indication that he was wrong about what they say. But I didn't need to, because I'm not embarrassed of what the Bible says. All right, so we looked at the fall of man in Genesis. And
I have no idea what Abbas is talking about, why God gave wives of David to the neighbor.
He said he wasn't talking to me, so...
Okay. All right, that makes absolutely no sense.
He's having some sort of side conversation. We'll just leave it be.
Yeah, but that didn't happen. Like, that didn't happen. I don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, I don't either.
All right.
So we have the fall. Now we also have restoration. God did not leave us in a fallen state. In Islam, there is no restoration. There's only, you're fallen people, you've been punished, try to do enough good deeds to go to heaven. Except, don't worry, because all that really matters is Allah's decree. Anyway, if you take the Quran seriously, you actually can't earn salvation. Allah just arbitrarily picks some people to save. The Bible has restoration, and that restoration is in the death and resurrection of Jesus. He takes our sins upon him. They are destroyed on the cross, and then he rises from the dead to prove that he has conquered the power of sin and death once and for all. In the restoration, I have a question for you guys. Who was the first apostle? It's a trick question. Well, it's not a trick question, but it's a tricky question.
In the restoration, who was the first apostle?
Who was the first apostle after Jesus rose from the dead?
Well, Peter was restored by Jesus and was, I think, the first one addressed specifically, but by name. But they don't have passages that address everyone by name.
So I'm going to say that the first apostle is actually Mary Magdalene.
Oh, okay. You didn't mean of the 12. You just meant of the messengers.
Because the way the New Testament defines apostle is someone who has encountered the resurrected living Jesus. So you have to be an eyewitness to his resurrection to be an apostle. That's what the title means in the biblical narrative. Anyone can be a teacher. The 12 are distinguished in the Bible by the term the 12 as opposed to disciples or apostles. And apostles are people who saw the risen Jesus. So Mary Magdalene, a woman, is the first apostle. So Muslims told us earlier that being first makes you the most superior. I don't agree with that logic, but by their logic, Mary Magdalene is the most superior apostle. Now, after the Sabbath, towards the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake. For an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning and his clothes white as snow. For the fear of him the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come, see the place where they lay him. Then go quickly and tell his disciple that he has risen from the dead, and behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. See, I have told you." So they departed quickly from the tomb, and with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." So the two Marys here are the two witnesses in Matthew's account. There may have been additional women present, but all four Gospels declare that the first eyewitnesses of Jesus, the risen Jesus, were women. If the biblical narrative is that women are inferior, then why would God choose women as the first eyewitnesses? Anything you guys would like to add?
No?
No, the testimony of women is held to the same height, the same level as the testimony of men in every Christian society. And that is why Jesus appeared to them first.
Absolutely. So we also incidentally saw them worshiping Jesus and him accepting worship. Just a side note for our Muslims who say that Jesus never allowed people to worship him in the biblical narrative. But through the resurrection of Jesus, the curse is destroyed. Whatever consequences of the curse that are moral, women, if they were ever at an inferior status, are elevated to the same status of men, and men likewise their status is elevated as well. Both elevated to our designed purpose, to be image bearers of God, to be called his own children. So, if I'm correct, then what about these verses? These are the three that I think are most commonly cited in the New Testament about the inferiority of women. I'm going to read the passages first, and then we'll go through them one by one. So Ephesians 5:22 and 23, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior." 1 Corinthians 14:34 through 35, "The women should keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but should be in submission, as the law also says. If there is anything they desire to learn, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is shameful for a woman to speak in church." And 1 Timothy 2:12, "I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet." So Ephesians 5 here. Before I say what I want to say, is there anything you'd like to say about Ephesians 5?
I would say keep reading. That's what I would say, which is what you're going to do, because that's what I usually say.
Yes, but not only keep reading, but actually go back a couple verses as well. And you'll see that this is not something that makes women inferior. Starting at verse 18, "And do not be drunk with wine, but be filled by the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing praise in your heart to the Lord, giving thanks always for all things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, to the God and Father, being subject to for Christ. Wives, to your own husbands as to the Lord, because the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, thus also wives should be subject to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself to her, in order that he might sanctify her by cleansing her with the washing of water by the word, in order that he might present and to himself the church glorious, not having a spot or a wrinkle or any such thing, but that she may be holy and blameless. Thus also husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. The one who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. The mystery is great, but I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. Only you also, each one of you, must thus love his own wife as himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So we have different words used, and the role of a husband and wife aren't identical, but they're both called to submit to one another. The verse that is often cited that we started with, which is 20, 21, doesn't actually have the word submit into it, or subject to one another in it. It's inherited from the previous verse, which is why I used this particular translation, because it makes it clear that it's one thought, one sentence. He first addresses all members of the church and says, be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then he says, wives, to your husbands, be subject. And then in a different way, he says, husbands, be subject to your wives. Treat them as if you would treat yourself. The two become one. You're one unit. You need to mutually submit to one another. Anything you want to add?
There is both a mutual submission and also a separate submission that is intended by the wives. But at the same time, there is a separate love that is demanded of the husbands that is different and beyond the love that is demanded of the wives. I believe what's addressed is what tends to be harder for each gender in this case. That this kind of self-sacrificial love is hard for a lot of men. And that's why, there's so much more time. The funny thing is, look at the amount of time spent on the husbands admonishing them to love their wives compared to the amount spent on the wives. But I'm happy to move on to the next one.
Absolutely. So we have 1 Corinthians, and I got these out of order. Sorry, that's a relevant context.
You gave it away!
Wait. Oh, man. Oh, right. I forgot. We read at the beginning. Sorry.
Good job, buddy.
Yeah, so we read the context, but we need to look at at least we got to look at all of 1 Corinthians, right? The author appears to say that women should be silent in church if we just look at that one verse. But we'll also look at what he says in chapter 11, not just what he says in chapter 14. And people will go to this one also to show the supposed inferiority of women. I started at 11:3. There's some additional context that you can read on your own. I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ. The head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. But every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors her head. But every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or to shave her head, let her cover her head. For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but a woman is the glory of man. For man was not made for woman, but woman for man. And Tommy Robinson gave it away here. He said he was thinking ahead. He meant the verse in Corinthians. Wasn't that only directed to churches in a specific time and place? Because in another verse, Paul permits women to prophesy. And indeed, he does. I'm not sure how you prophesy if you're silent.
Well, one thing you also have to find out is that Paul talks a lot about silence and silencing people. And he always means ending argument. He doesn't mean that people not make any noise. He talks about it in a lot of different contexts, about silencing, typically people who have different, who are trying to bring up different arguments. He talks about silencing them. He doesn't mean that they are no longer speaking ever again. You can just do a quick word study of all of his uses of the word silence and silent, and you can easily determine what he means by that. That he means that no one raises their voice to quarrel. He has a very specific meaning that he uses each time. So he means that nobody's carping. So so another thing that's important is the understanding of what head covering meant in the ancient world. You'll see pictures of ancient young women, and they're running around all with their heads uncovered. And the married women all have covered heads. Married women have covered heads because that was basically their wedding ring, right? And so some women in Corinth were saying that, when it comes to the resurrection, we won't be married or unmarried. We'll all be one in Christ, no male or female, just, this total status of situational equality, right? And so they were taking off their head coverings that signified marriage when they came in, which would basically be kind of like taking off your wedding ring and throwing it into a bucket kind of thing. It was very inappropriate in that cultural circumstance, because you're basically saying that you're not married anymore, that you're a single woman. The unmarried girls did not cover their hair in churches even after this came out, for a very many centuries after was whenever all women started covering their hair, whether or not they were young or old. Nuns did cover their hair because that was considered to have the same status as a married woman, to be a householder type of woman. And so that high status was portrayed in the covering of the hair. Head covers were status symbols. They were for householders. Slave women, for example, were never allowed to cover their hair, as another example. So it wasn't about, she must cover up. And in fact, their hair was still quite visible. There are other things about, chiding women against wearing fancy braids and pearls and stuff to show off to flaunt themselves in front of other people while at church, that's just inappropriate and you shouldn't do that. But the head coverings of the time actually showed tons of your hair. It was just a symbol to say, hey, look, I'm married, just like a wedding ring. And that's what this is addressing here. Now, I happen to actually wear a headband whenever I go to church, specifically because of this passage. Even though it is speaking into that culture, I choose to do a continuation with a nominal symbol, essentially, of it whenever I go to church, but most people don't, and that's fine as well.
Yeah, the whole main theme of all of 1 Corinthians is Paul talking about the relationship between our freedom in Christ and not causing people to stumble, not causing people to fall away, not causing unnecessary shame upon the gospel. And we can see that many things that he discusses right up into this passage are clearly cultural things, talking about the way people are misusing the Lord's Supper, whether or not people can eat meat sacrificed to idols, and so forth. So it's clearly a cultural reference. I didn't put it in for the head covering, but it's a bonus because Muslims love to go to this, and they're like, even though Paul's the one that corrupted the gospel, we'll quote Paul when he says that women should have their head covered because we think that agrees with Islam.
Yeah, and it's specifically talking about, in this case, in the church and in church services. This is about public praying and prophesying, meaning that they would do that aloud. Unlike in Islam, we don't recite, they didn't recite identical prayers all the time together. So this would be a woman who is praying alone with only her voice, or prophesying alone with only her voice at this time. Okay? So whatever else happens, you must understand that Paul is also saying that women do pray for the congregation, in front of the congregation, alone, and prophesy in public in the church. So it has to be congruent with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should point out that we think of prophecy as predicting the future, but that's not really what it means. It really means speaking on behalf of God. So when it says that a woman is prophesying in the church, that means she's teaching. It means that she's speaking God's words on. So whatever Paul means in chapter 7 or chapter 14, he certainly isn't telling women to be silent in church, because he already talked about the proper way to pray and prophesy, which is done out loud. Now, Mary may or may not agree with my interpretation of 1 Corinthians 14, because I adopt a somewhat controversial position on it. But I believe that what Paul is actually doing when he says that women shouldn't speak in the church is he's quoting a misunderstanding of his opponents. And then he contradicts them. He makes fun of them as a result of this. Reading the whole passage, if any man, and this is using the King James. I don't normally use the King James, but they happen to render this verse particularly well. If any man speak in an unknown tongue, let it be by two, or at most three, and that by course let one interpret. But if there is no interpreter, let him keep silence in the church, and let him speak to himself and to God. Let the prophets speak two or three, and let the others judge. If anything be revealed to another that sitteth by, let the first hold his peace. For ye may all prophesy one by one, that all may learn, and all may be comforted. And the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets, for God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. Let your women keep silent, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. And if they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is shame for women to speak in the church. What? Came the word of God out from you, or came it on to you only? If any man thinks himself to be a prophet or spiritual, let him acknowledge that the things that I write unto you are commandments of the Lord. But if any man be ignorant, let him be ignorant. So what I think he's done is he's giving this teaching on orderly prophecy on the church, the proper way to speak in tongues, the proper way to prophesy. And he's saying, there's a specific fashion to this. And then he goes on and says, I'm telling you to, be quiet, wait your turn. Some of you have said, as in all the churches of the saints, let the women keep silent. And then he's like, what? Are you totally clueless? This isn't what I teach at all. That's how I interpret the passage. Anything you'd like to add?
Not really. I'm just really tired today. Sorry, I'm so sick.
Hey, no worries. We only have one more, and a boss reminded of us that First Timothy 2:11. Let a woman learn in silence with all submission. I permit no woman authority over men. She is to be kept silent. So we have the whole passage here, starting with 2:8 and ending at 3:1. I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Likewise, also the women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness, with good works. Let a woman learn quietly with all submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Yet she will be saved through childbearing, if they continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Now, first of all, I'm going to say that even if this does teach that only men are allowed to be ministers and preachers and leader of the word, that isn't different than Islam. So I don't know what Abbas is telling us here about how this is supposedly a flaw of Christianity, because that's exactly what Islam teaches, that only men are allowed to lead services. My other comment would be that this is a real understand, and I don't mean because I don't want it to be true that women are not allowed to teach, because it doesn't really work. Paul gives this bizarre argument that the woman will be saved through childbearing, which is commonly interpreted as the seed of Eve, i.e. Jesus. But it's really difficult, and by that I mean scholars struggle to understand. They're like, I'm not really quite sure what Paul meant here, because it kind of sounds like he's teaching salvation through works, and we know that's not what he's teaching. So it's a little hard to understand. I have a couple other things I could say, but I'd like to hear your thoughts first.
Yeah, I think that this is going immediately into types and shadows with Eve and Adam, and they're still talking about Adam and Eve, yet she, meaning Eve, will be saved through childbearing through the one seed that eventually came and ransomed everyone who was in Sheol. So, if they continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control, is a kind of sort of parallel to that kind of redemption through the church, and is a typological type of parallel being made there. So no, Abbas, that is not what was ever meant. That it was through childbearing, through the unique role of women, that Jesus came into the world, and thus the unique role of women is not inferior but rather salvific. So a lot of times whenever Paul says something negative to correct women, he immediately turns it around to some kind of praise or elevation of women. For example, earlier whenever he talks about the head covering, he turns it around and says that women have authority over their heads, their own heads. And some people mistranslate that, but what he's saying is that women do have the control, this kind of authority given over themselves, and that's what's meant here, is that that as Eve was saved through, we have the story of Eve who was deceived, right? But it was also from Eve through which salvation came to humankind. So that the woman is uniquely salvific, just as Eve was the first to be deceived. So he is balancing this negative with positive, is what he's doing, and is elevating the role of women and of childbearing by reminding us that it's through childbearing that salvation came in the future with respect to Eve. So this area here is about orderliness and not being difficult and quarrelsome. And here it is, because it goes from woman to man to Adam and Eve, this is very clearly a teaching, I think at least, of wives and husbands, because gyne, the word for woman, is exactly the same as the word for wife in Greek, which makes things difficult sometimes. So I believe that what's being said is that wives specifically should not have positions of authority over husbands, because you did have deaconesses in the early church. People talk about it like, oh, were there deaconesses? Does this mean deaconesses? Well, all you have to do is look at the early church documents and find out whether or not there were any, and there were deaconesses. They didn't have the exact same roles as deacons did, but they did have roles in church. They had roles in church services, and they had roles in baptisms of women and in visiting the sick at home, especially the women. So they kept complete order on the women's side of the church and stuff like that. And so they would have, and the respect that you're told to give to older women as your mothers, well, you have to obey your mother as well. So older women had a position over men in in the church. Older women over younger men was a position of a kind of authority. And of course, you had women who had servants, and they had those positions of authority. There's nothing anywhere in the first 1,000 years of Christianity where you can find one person saying that, oh, well, Paul's saying here that no woman should order any man around, so women can't tell male servants what to do. Like, that just doesn't exist.
Hey, honey. Oh,
yeah.
sorry, Mary. Go ahead. Continue.
It's just one of these kind of very common misunderstandings coming to it from a 21st century viewpoint, in which, but like the woman boss, the girl boss thing is actually very ancient. Like Lydia the Dyer of Silver, she was in charge of an entire enterprise. She was a businesswoman. He's not saying that she can't be a businesswoman. That's just silly. Saying that in the church, I do think that he was saying that the role of elder / overseer was specifically for men, because that's the only thing we have records of in the early church, is that men had these roles, but women had other roles. Women, Phoebe, for instance, brought a letter of Paul and stood up and explained it to the church. That was within the purview of women's proper activities in the early church, because Paul sent her with the letter, for heaven's sake.
I mean, there were a lot of important roles for women in the early church. But, yeah. Hey, honey, that whole section about braided hair and gold and pearls, do you think rainbow hair counts?
Well, I mean, it's clearly cultural.
I know.
if you're doing things that make you have elevated status, make you a person of importance in your own society, then whatever those things may be, those are inappropriate. You shouldn't be trying to have people judge you by you wearing fine clothing and other, or putting gold in your hair here, or wearing pearls, things that emphasize your status, because your status is a sinner redeemed by God, who is viewed equally with all other sinners redeemed by God. We do have a response from Abbas, which we'll get to in a second, but I did want to pull up a comment here from Margarita first, that the verse is mistranslated. It's supposed to state, wife are not permitted to usurp teaching authority over the husband, possibly referring specifically to Priscilla and Apollos. And first of all, I definitely agree that the word translated as exercise authority is an extremely strong word in the Greek. I think usurp is probably the best English translation. And then, of course, the Greek words for women and men and husband and wife are the same. So this very well could be speaking of wives and their husbands, as Mary was saying. But I'd say at least it's definitely speaking of usurping authority. And that's not an action that would be appropriate for anyone. That's not an action that's appropriate for a man to falsely take authority that's not granted to him either. Comment I wanted to make on the passage, and the reason I included 3:1 here is because even if viewing this as qualifications for the office in view is that of an overseer, or what we would commonly call an elder today, someone who's in management of the church. That it's not talking about the person who gets up and gives the sermon. It's talking about the people who are managing the church, the people who are making sure that proper doctrine is followed. So, that doesn't change what it says, obviously, but we do need to understand what it isn't saying. And it's certainly not saying that women are unqualified to make any noise in church, to teach men in any setting whatsoever. That's just nonsense. Anything you want to add before I address Abbas's comment here? So Abbas first accused Paul of being sexist, and then I asked him if Paul possibly not allowing women to preach means that he's sexist, but when Muhammad did the same thing, that means he's good. Did I get that right? And he's like, no. What I mean is that Paul thinks less of women. That's why he never mentioned Mary Magdalene in 1 Corinthians 15, even though according to the Gospels, Mary was the first that met Jesus after the resurrection. Well, thanks for telling me what I already told you earlier in this stream, that Mary Magdalene is the first apostle. But do you know what 1 Corinthians is, Abbas? I mean, I know you don't, but you want to help him out, Mary? What is 1 Corinthians 15?
So it's an early creed of the church that Paul is actually quoting here. So this is what Christians would stand together and recite as kind of the fundamental beliefs of Christians about the resurrection of Christ. And it's only a few highlights. It's a very short creed that's easy to remember in your mind. And they'd stand together and like just recite this particular thing as evidences of the resurrection. And so it's only hitting on the highlights.
Then I'm going to look at a couple passages on what Paul actually thought of women, since he brought this up and he claims that Paul somehow devalues women.
Yes, if Paul made an explicit statement on the inequality or equality of women, then that would be relevant.
Yes, but first, before we get to that explicit statement, let's take a look at how he addresses people in a couple of his letters. He says, "Greet those workers in the Lord," and then he names several names here, some of which are female names. So he's saying that females are included in the workers of the Lord. He's talking about people who are spreading the gospel. He's talking about people who have this authority to teach the gospel to other people. So even if he's saying that there's something about a formal worship setting, he's not saying that women can't teach. He's not saying that women can't spread the gospel. In fact, he's praising them for doing exactly that. And also, let's look at 1 Corinthians. He says that it was reported to me by Chloe's people that you were quarreling among yourselves. Paul takes instruction from Chloe. Paul himself takes instruction from a female. He says that she informed me that this is what's going on, and I believe her. So I'm writing you this letter to correct you on the things you've been doing. Amazing stuff that he supposedly didn't value women, but he takes their word. And finally, Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free. There is no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offsprings, heirs according to promise. All people, regardless of their social status, their gender, are equal in Christ. Paul couldn't have made it any clearer.
Mm-hmm. And this is talking about the inheritance, the eternal inheritance that we will have. Before that, he was talking about how everyone are sons. And because in Greek, you can either say sons or sons and daughters, it's the same word, just like in Arabic. That if there's one male among females, then you use the male term. But he specifies, no, you all inherit as a son would inherit, not as sons and daughters. There's no differential in inheritance. Because in the actual world, they had a differential between what men would inherit and what women would inherit, because girls got dowries and they took them off to other families, and then they didn't get the same inheritance at death that the boys got. But this is saying that you, whether or not you're a slave, whether or not you're free, whether or not you're Jew, whether or not you're Greek, you will count as a son to God, and not as whatever you happen to be, and that in Christ Jesus you have this equality in heaven, whereas of course in the Islamic heaven you get to be a blow-up sex doll of men for the rest of your life and get assigned to a man if your husband doesn't happen to make it. So
And that's if you're lucky enough to get there, since after all,
Yes.
most women go to hell.
Yep.
All right, I think we're going to close out on that. Thank you all for joining us today. We did open up the stream for Muslims. We did give them the opportunity to come in and defend their religion. And throughout the entire stream, I think we had about 8 Muslims comment at one point. I believe a total of 2 sentences were vaguely in every single other one was an attempt to attack Christianity. And I think that by itself speaks volumes. Muslims know that their teaching on women is embarrassing, and they don't want to talk about it. Thank you for joining. God bless. Tune in tomorrow when I speak with Safraz about Isaiah 42.
I'm going to try to be there.
Tune in
What
later in the
time?
day. 2 o'clock. Or sorry, 1 o'clock for Safraz, 1 o'clock Eastern for Safraz. And then we'll be having Bible study afterwards at 4 o'clock.
Oh, we're doing Bible study at 4? Why
Yeah,
4?
I hadn't told you yet because Ian just told me. But
Well, I don't know if I'll be home by then or not because we're going to pet goats tomorrow.
yeah, that's fine. I mean, you don't have to be there. But
Okay, anyway.
I mean, we'd love it if you were, but if you're not, you're not. So thanks for joining, everyone. God bless.